Welcome to the Reason and Theology Show. I'm your host, Michael Lofton, joined by Erick Ybarra, a Roman Catholic. And today we're going to be discussing mainly the papacy, especially Canon 6 of Nicaea and the Roman primacy, which is going to be a response to J. Dyer. Erick, how are you doing this evening?
Doing well, Michael. Good to be here.
Yes, sir. And just kind of as a heads up for everybody, towards the end of this show, we're going to have some live calls. I'll start to give the number a little bit later on, but just wanted to give everybody a heads up that we will be taking those. So have your phone nearby, get ready to contact us. Of course, you can always ask your questions in the chat on YouTube, but if you want to call in and speak to Erick directly and ask him questions, that would be great too. Again, I'll give the phone number in a little bit. But Erick, why don't you tell me about Canon 6? Why don't you also maybe even give me a little bit of a preface and tell me what Jay says about it and perhaps where you're going with this?
Yeah, well, J. Dyer, as the listeners probably know, he's an Eastern Orthodox apologist, and he speaks mostly on the issue of St. Thomas Aquinas and his doctrine of divine simplicity, and why it poses a problem, a dogmatic problem for the Catholic Church. But occasionally he will dabble into, it seems from looking at his website, to the subject of the papacy itself. And, he brings it up in some of his videos that I have seen. But recently he published an article. And in that article, one of the issues that he brought up was that the sixth canon of the First Ecumenical Council proves that the only kind of jurisdiction that the church understood were limited regional jurisdictions. And he brought that up in an article that he wrote. That article, if you Google it, it's called 5 Simple Arguments Against the Papacy. And you'll find in that article, he brings this issue up. And I have had some people on the internet approach me with this objection as well. I'm assuming it was because they read it from Jay's website, because it was in association with his fan base. And it has come up in the past just generally in my dialogue with Eastern Orthodox and Protestants. Both Protestants and Orthodox bring this canon up in order to show that here's early evidence for the papal primacy being just limited to the Roman Church. And I might as well read the canon, right?
Yeah, go ahead.
So people can understand what we're talking about. So the listeners realize this is the Council of Nicaea, which was convened by Emperor Constantine in the 4th century, 325 AD. And the 6th canon reads like this: let the ancient customs in Egypt, Libya, and Pentapolis prevail, that the Bishop of Alexandria have jurisdiction in all these, since the like is customary for the Bishop of Rome also. Likewise in Antioch and in other provinces, let the churches retain their privileges. And this is to be universally understood, that if anyone be made bishop without the consent of the metropolitan, the great synod has declared that such a man ought not to be a bishop. If, however, 2 or 3 bishops shall from natural love of contradiction oppose the common suffrage of the rest, it being reasonable and in accordance with the ecclesiastical law, then let the choice of the majority prevail. So that is this 6th canon. It's gone through some modifications through history, but this is a reliable reference to that canon. But the point of the canon in relation to what we're talking about is this part where it says, since the like is customary for the Bishop of Rome also. So the background to this canon is that the Church of Alexandria, the Bishop of Alexandria, he enjoyed a certain amount of primacy in the Northeast African part of the continent there, plus over other territories. This was a customary privilege that the Bishop of Alexandria had, that anybody who was ordained bishop in Egypt, Pentapolis, and Libya had to have his permission. Now, that wasn't typical for every church, right? Not every church required that. So there was something unique about the Church of Alexandria. There was a dispute, and this is quite possibly the historical context behind the canon. There was a bishop who oversaw the ordinations in Egypt, and his name was Meletius, and he was ordaining bishops and refusing to wait for the permission of the Patriarch of Alexandria in order to get that ratified. So the Council of Nicaea knew that some of these infringements on the right of the Patriarch of Alexandria were taking place. And so the canon enacts that these privileges are to be brought into the form of ecclesiastical law. It says that there are ancient customs, right? So custom now becomes canon, or custom becomes law. So now, if anybody infringes the rights of the Patriarch of Alexandria in giving him the right to ratify the election of bishops, they're going to be deposed. But it says this is customary for Rome as well. And so the idea is that the bishops at Nicaea are saying, just like Rome has this privilege in the provinces of Italy, so likewise the Bishop of Alexandria has the rights over here in the East. So the idea is, if the papacy was true, which claims a universal jurisdiction over the whole church, then how could Rome pose as a model for a regional metropolitical type jurisdiction? And so that's really where what Jay Dyer here is getting at in his article, as far as I could see. He's saying, basically, if the Church of Rome had universal jurisdiction, it's unthinkable that the Eastern bishops would try to use Rome as an example of a supra-metropolitical jurisdiction. That would show that Rome's jurisdiction was limited way over there in Italy to the provinces of central and south of the peninsula. So that's the argument in a nutshell. So Roman jurisdiction over the whole world is not historical. It's proven wrong by this canon, in other words.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But you would still argue that there is a primacy not only of authority, but also jurisdiction that is legitimate. And I'm sure you would appeal to certain instances in the first millennium, perhaps not a canonical jurisdiction over all the churches, but at least perhaps an authority there. What are some of the arguments that you would propose to say that the Pope had primacy of jurisdiction in the first millennium?
Well, just in relation to this canon, it's absolutely true that Rome had a limited metropolitical jurisdiction, or maybe we can call it supra-metropolitical jurisdiction in the West, and that definitely had boundaries. Okay, but we need to understand that the Church of Rome has 5 different senses of her primacy. So the first primacy that the Bishop of Rome has is common to all bishops. the primacy of the episcopal chair over the church in Rome. Then you have the metropolitan role of the Bishop of Rome, and that many bishops had, but not all bishops had that. So you had metropolitans like in Ephesus, you had a functioning metropolitan in Carthage. Obviously, Alexandria and Antioch and Jerusalem then had metropolitans. I think Jerusalem was oversawn by another see, but Jerusalem eventually it was elevated later. So you have the bishop's seat, the metropolitan seat, then you have the primate of the Italian peninsula as a whole. We see throughout the centuries that the Bishop of Rome would convene the Italian synod, the bishops of Italy would come. Then after that, this came much later, he was referred to as the Patriarch of the West. And so this kind of encompassed, North Africa, Gaul, Spain, Hispania, and then the North, where you'd have, Britain, and also in other places like Illyria, the peninsula of Illyria, which came into the Church of Rome's oversight in the 4th century. But then you have the 5th level of Roman primacy, which is the universal primacy. And nobody denied that. Even here at the Council of Nicaea, the insinuation that J. Dyer is trying to give off here is that people only knew about the limited jurisdiction in Rome. Well, that's false. And we know that's false because it only took 15 years for the fiasco of St. Athanasius to happen, where we see Rome interfering into the affairs of the East and overturning decisions of their councils and restoring bishops who were deposed by Eastern synods. So we can go into the details of that, but just right there in the 4th century, only about 15 years after the Council of Nicaea, we see an admission that the Roman See has a universal function at jurisdiction at the universal level. And just put in simple, if I may go, if you have something to say, stop me.
Well, no, you can, follow up with some more information there, but let me ask, this jurisdiction, was it just simply at will? Was it immediate or was it mediate? Did they have to ask for his intervention?
Well, that's a good question.
Because Vatican I wants to say it's immediate. And when we look at the first millennium, would you say that's the case?
Yeah, so there were plenty of instances where the Bishop of Rome exercised immediate jurisdiction. And but here's the thing, to this day, the majority of cases is mediate, right? I can't just go to Rome with my complaints about my bishop. They're going to turn me right around. So the normal outlay and function of the church had always been through the appellate structure. You go through an appeal process to the most proximate primate. So if you have a dispute in a local church, you would go to your local bishop. If a local bishop has a dispute with another bishop, they would go to their local synod or their regional synod, which usually had a metropolitan as its head. And then if the bishop was upset with a decision that was made on that level, he could appeal to a higher authority, which, depending on which century you're talking about, could be one of the patriarchs, or it could be the Roman See. But we see from very early on that even the Roman See were turning people around because they were not abiding by this practical law that you need to go through your proximate primates before you get to the universal primate. For example, you see that under the pontificate of Pope St. Innocent I, there were a lot of North African bishops who were upset about certain decisions, and they thought by just crossing the Mediterranean and going to Rome that it was going to resolve everything. Come to find out, the Pope would say, even though it's in my authority to overturn these decisions, it would not be right for me to do so because there's not sufficient witnesses. I don't have the full story from both sides, et cetera, et cetera. So those are constraints that force an appellate structure. And that's why the early canons of the Council of Sardica in 343 enacted an appellate structure, because it would be so retarded to just say everybody who has a complaint that they don't like can write to the Bishop of Rome. That would, I mean, the church at Rome would be full of letters. You wouldn't be able to see anybody. Mm-hmm. That's just imprudent. So they set up a structure where the local proximate authorities were respected. The privileges and rights of bishops and metropolitans are respected. And if a situation warrants the judgment of the Bishop of Rome, then he could get involved. But that doesn't mean that he's locked down to an appellate structure.
Okay.
So yeah, we have instances where he exercises universal jurisdiction without the role of being asked,
without an appeal. And that's what I want to get to, because for instance, we have Jay Dyer in the chat, and he's raising some good concerns. He says that, you know, the fact that there are appeals that were made by various patriarchs is not proof of universal jurisdiction. So maybe if you could speak about some instances in which he exercised universal jurisdiction in the first millennium without being initiated by an appeal. And then he also asks, you know, well, you know, but what is the entire point of having an ecumenical council anyway, if they could just appeal to Rome? So maybe if you could speak on that a little bit.
Yeah, so that's okay. So to the first question, which is a good one. Yeah, there are examples of the Bishop of Rome exercising universal jurisdiction. I would say one of the clearest examples is the excommunication of Patriarch Acacius in 484 under Pope Saint Felix III, and he's one of the sainted popes of the Orthodox Church, and he met in a synod in Rome. He convened bishops together, and Acacius, if Jay Dyer doesn't know, or if the listeners don't know, he was attempting to basically make the Council of Chalcedon superfluous. And in Rome, that was a no-no. So Pope Felix III basically wrote a pretty explicit statement condemning and removing Acacius from episcopal office. Now, we know that's an exercise of universal jurisdiction because bishops in the East wrote back and said, you can't do that.
Okay. So wouldn't that be proof that he was overstepping his boundaries if they pushed back immediately?
Well, it's proof that some people thought he was, you know. So if your listeners are familiar with the way that this whole Acacian schism was resolved, it was a pretty long schism. It lasted about 35 years. The way it was resolved was Rome didn't turn back and repent about any of her exercises of jurisdiction. The Emperor Justin, that was the uncle of Justinian, he wanted to foster new relations with the East. And he got his nephew, Justinian, to sort of ask Rome what the conditions of reunion would be. And at the time, it was Pope Saint Hormisdas. And Pope Saint Hormisdas didn't say, oh, I'm sorry for, you know, my predecessor, you know, excommunicating Felix. He said, no. He pretty much doubled down on the rights and the prerogatives of the Roman See on divine foundation. He required that Acacius's name be removed from the holy diptycha of divine services in Constantinople and in all the other Eastern sees. And long story short, about 2,500 Eastern prelates signed this formula of Saint Hormisdas in order to get back into the church.
And what does the formula say explicitly that affirms the Pope's position?
Yeah. So, well, the key thing here is that Acacius's name has to be removed
Mhm.
from the diptychs, because when Pope Felix III excommunicated Acacius, there were many Eastern bishops who refused to remove his name from divine service.
Mhm.
So they would continue to commemorate his name. And so that was one of the issues of that formula that the Pope mandated in order for the Eastern sees to make it back into union.
Mhm.
The other thing was that Leo the Great was taken off the diptychs. And so Leo's tome, Leo's letters, the Council of Chalcedon, all these things needed to be reintegrated into the liturgy in the East, because they were confiscated by the Monophysites. So we don't see any retraction there from the Roman side, and Eastern Orthodox scholars admit that that was the position that was taken at the time by Pope St. Hormisdas.
Doesn't the formula touch on the role of the Pope in basically saying that an individual has to be in communion with him in order to be part of the church? Isn't that in the formula itself?
Yeah, that's the most reasonable reading. I mean, you can throw some Vaseline in there and try to get some sort of a high papalist primacy that's not really immediate and infallible,
Mhm.
with all the post medieval, 19th century scholastic terms. But I would say the most reasonable reading is that, if you want, I could probably pull it up here and read it for the audience, but if you want, I could just summarize it.
Go ahead.
He said the Pope basically wrote a formula which was not him speaking. It was a formula of the signer speaking. And basically the signer was admitting that the contents of the formula were correct. And it opens up by saying that the first condition of salvation is to keep the true faith of the fathers. And then it cites the promise of Jesus Christ to the Apostle Peter, which says, "You are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell will never prevail against it." And it says that history has proven the course of this promise, because the Roman See had, up to that point at least, kept the true faith and had never sullied into heresy. Towards the end of the formula, it says that those who are not in communion with the Catholic Church, comma, there's no comma in the Greek or in the Latin, but those who are those who refuse to remain in communion with the Catholic Church, that is, well, you have a translation in English, that is, or that means those who are not in communion with the Apostolic See are anathema. So that language there is very strong, and most historians would say that was an exercise of jurisdiction in a foreign diocese that's not welcome in the idea of a primus inter pares structure.
Well, what would you say in response to those? For instance, I see in the chat the question being raised. What would you say about the Samakian forgeries? Do you think that has any bearing on the subject?
Well, yes, it does. So the pontificate of Symmachus, however you want to pronounce it, there he was being brought under some criminal charges, and there was really nothing that could be done other than convene synods, because there was a rival pope at the time. And so they actually appealed to the Arian king, Theodoric, in order to kind of arbitrate the situation. As a response, what we can deduce is that there were certain forgeries from earlier centuries that were made in order to prove that Pope Symmachus was untouchable. And so some of those forgeries came from a story in the 4th century about a pope who pinched incense.
Yeah.
And the question was, all right, what are we going to do with this man? Everybody else who pinches incense, it falls right under the canons.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But this forgery, which, okay, again, textual criticism still on the run with this, but most historians land here that it's a forgery. The bishops in Rome, the clergy in Rome, basically said, "You're the successor of Peter. We can't touch you. God is the only one who judges you." So, but what we know, first of all, is those who forged these forgeries, however dishonest they were, they themselves were trying to promote and defend this view that the Pope could not be deposed, especially by the power of a king. So these were forgeries made in order to prove something that they then held. Okay, so that's number one. Number two, not everybody who supported the belief that Pope Symmachus could not be deposed was basing their argument on those forgeries. So you have two Eastern Orthodox saints who were there at the time in those Italian synods who supported the idea that the Pope could not be judged unless it was a heresy. And they said only God could judge him. And that's Saint Ennodius and Saint Avitus of Vienna. If you type in Google my name, Avitus, Avitus, and Ennodius, Ennodius, I have an article where I go through the history where these two Eastern Orthodox saints, again, these are venerated saints in the East. There is undisputed textual evidence that they were not basing their argument off the Symmachine forgeries at the time. And they supported the fact that the Pope was the head of the Universal Church because he had a divine investiture from the Lord given to Peter. Okay, so that's what I would say as a second response to the Symmachine forgeries. The third is that there's ample other texts that are not forgery that support the same conviction. Okay.
Now, I want to get to a question by Craig, and then I have we still need to deal with the other previous question about, what's the purpose of an ecumenical council if they can just appeal, individuals can just appeal to the Pope. But let me also ask you this. Let's say you have a Pope who does assert some kind of immediate universal jurisdiction in the first millennium. Let's go ahead and grant that for the moment. How do we know they're right? There was so much pushback from the East, during the first millennium, whenever it seems that they exercise this. Could it be that they were just wrong? Because you do have, you've noted the point that these popes they're also Orthodox saints, and yet there's also Orthodox saints who maintain some things that Orthodoxy as a whole doesn't hold to. So how do we know that this is just not one of those things?
Yeah. So, anytime I bring these issues up, I'm not putting on the table some sort of knock them down, drag them out proof. What I'm establishing are motives of credibility.
Okay.
And by doing so, I'm trying to push other things away that are incredible.
Okay.
Okay. So when you have a solid belief coming from the beginning of the church, produring and surviving each century forward, which is accepted by both East and West. At the time, that was a way to refer to the whole oikumene, East and West. And when you have men who are venerated as saints, not just venerated as saints, because there were plenty of saints in local churches that were venerated that were not venerated on a universal level. But when you have saints that are venerated on a universal level, like, for example, Pope St. Leo the Great, Pope St. Gregory the Great, you have Pope Hormisdas is venerated as a great saint in the East. Pope Saint Agatho in the 7th century. He's venerated on not just on a local level. These men had universal fame. They were not degraded at all in any sense whatsoever. They were upheld as trophies, in other words.
Okay.
So that's another motive of credibility, that this belief at least is not a heresy. Because when we're dealing with the church in the first millennium, these men are spring-loaded to identify heresies. And so when you have a belief that's surviving this long and nobody's hacking it away, finally condemning it, that adds a motive of credibility, not a proof. Let's get that away. We're not talking geometry here. We're talking motives of credibility. So you would build a case, in other words. The Orthodox could also build a case. I mean, I could probably build a really good case for the Orthodox Church. So there's several things we could go through. I don't have anything written down for this video. I was only looking at this issue.
Well, I want to return to the issue of the Canon 6, but a couple of questions that I do still want to deal with. Maybe touch on the issue of why even have ecumenical councils very briefly. Then I want to get to a real quick question from Craig. Maybe allow you the chance to follow up, with anything you want to finalize with Canon 6, and then after that, I'm going to take some live calls. So
no problem, Michael.
So
you're in the driver's seat.
Ecumenical councils, where are you going with that? Why do we have them? Yeah,
well, the first answer is that maybe the Pope doesn't know the answer to a theological question. Mm-hmm. So nothing that we teach in the Catholic Church about the Pope means that he's going to know anything. Okay, it doesn't mean he's not going to need the support of the church at large, theologians. For a perfect example, we could go to one of the most vocal popes of history, who he was not shy at all to talk about the divine institution of his position, Pope Nicholas I in the 9th century. This was the Pope that first confronted Photius and the problem of his election in the East. When Photius wrote his encyclical against the Latins about Latin liturgy, the abuses of the liturgy that was going on in the Balkans, in the Bulgarian missions, Pope Nicholas didn't write a letter himself saying, "Hey, I'm the Pope, I'm the successor of Peter, I've got all the knowledge in the world, and I'm like a machine, and I can just press a button and write a document to end this whole thing." He appointed Hincmar of Rheims to write a refutation. It was one of the first contra the Greeks that shows up on the scene. So here we have a pope that all historians admit was claiming universal jurisdiction. Okay? Nobody denies that Pope Nicholas was claiming universal jurisdiction, and he claimed the infallibility of the teaching ministry of Rome. And yet, to respond to Photius's great encyclical, he appoints a Frankish theologian to write a contra to the Greeks. Now, why would he do that? So that's a perfect example showing that the papal doctrines don't entail what's called papal automation, where the Pope is like a button that you could press and he immediately has the knowledge and the wherewithal to answer and resolve every theological dispute. So having an ecumenical council would fall right into the utility there. A pope may not know the answer to a question. A perfect example of that, a second example of that, in the second millennium, way after the schism, is the debate over the Dominicans versus the Molinists on the question of middle knowledge and unconditional divine election. This dispute was, it was over the Pope's head. And so he kind of shelved it, and it's still shelved to this day. Okay, a second reason why an ecumenical council should be called is because whenever bishops are forced to come into one local area, their confession now becomes accountable to them. So if I want to make sure that everybody in my neighborhood agrees with the laws, I want them all to show up and give a written statement that they agree. So that way, later on, when they start making up excuses for why they don't believe or they don't want to follow, we could return to that moment where they gave public confession. So that's a good utility of having an ecumenical council, where you could bring everybody who's representing the churches face to face, and they're forced to expose themselves as either in accordance with the truth or out of accord with the truth. So that makes that in other words, it reveals the heretics and it reveals the Orthodox. We see this perfectly in the Council of Chalcedon, because Pope Leo the Great sent legates not to have theological discoveries. He wrote a letter basically saying, this document must be signed and it must have names signed. And if they don't agree with you, you leave and go home. Okay, that's how the Pope responded to the convention of that council. The other reason why you should have an ecumenical council is because a lot of people want to agree with the authority of the church, but they need help in understanding. So what better than to get together and to ask, how is this reconciled with the past? We see the perfect example of that. At the Council of Chalcedon, you had the bishops of Palestine and the bishops of Illyria and some of those cohorts of Dioscorus who just couldn't understand how the second and third letter of Cyril of Alexandria to Nestorius could be reconciled with Leo's tome. And so they made a 3-day commission where those bishops were going to meet in the household of Patriarch Anatolius, and they were going to have a question and answer and a teaching symposium for 3 days in order to help the Illyrian episcopate and the Palestinian episcopate understand how Leo's tome is in continuity with Saint Cyril. What a perfect place to do that is in an ecumenical council that stretches over days and days and days. Now, there's many other reasons, and we can go on and on, but those are three.
Well, no, that's sufficient for now, because I want to get back to Canon 6, and then I'm going to go to some of these chat questions and then live calls. So go ahead and maybe summarize, some concluding thoughts about Canon 6 in response to Jay.
Yeah. So all the scholars who comment on Canon 6 that are of repute today. So even Bishop Peter, and I'm going to botch the pronunciation on this, he's an Orthodox canon scholar, Peter Lehulier. Forgive me if I pronounced that wrong. You have the classical Charles Heffele. You've got Norman Tanner. You have Anglican scholars like Trevon Jalond. These scholars will all tell you that Canon 6 is dealing with the role of the suprametropolitan, who's got certain prerogatives over the election of bishops in the locale, over provinces. The Bishop of Rome was a perfect example, because in Italy he had that role. So the Roman primacy of universal jurisdiction is not being supported, and it's not being denied. And I would say it's in support just 15 years later, when the president of Nicaea, whose name was Osius of Cordoba, he presided at the Council of Sardica. And at the Council of Sardica, they defended the Pope's right to overturn episcopal decisions anywhere in the world. So right there, this whole idea of a locked jurisdiction to the Roman See or the Metropolia of Rome is disproven.
Sorry, I was muted there. Let's go ahead and get to some of these chat questions. Drew, if you will, jump in here and, maybe go ahead and read some of those questions. I know Craig had one. I want to get to that first and then maybe dive into some others. And then here in about 5 or 10 minutes or so, I'll start to give out the phone call number where y'all can, call in and do some live questions.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Drew with the Atheist Reformation here. Just here to read some questions for Mike and Eric today. How you guys doing?
Doing well. Good to see your face.
Yeah, good to see you as well.
All right. So question that we have from Craig. This is more of a kind of following up on his initial question of, can we ask Eric about Rome falsifying Canon 6 of Nicaea and being corrected in Chalcedon about this? He adds to this as, why did they add Sodicea to Nicaea's canons?
Am I good to go?
Yeah, go ahead, Eric.
Okay. Yeah, so I don't know any historian who would say that Rome falsified Canon 6. So that's a new one to me. What I can say is the last session of Chalcedon, you had a minor dispute about this issue with Constantinople being elevated to second place. And as a result, the Roman legates cited their Latin translation of Canon 6, which was interpolated with a statement that basically said Rome has always held the primacies, which, and it's plural in the Latin, primacies. So a lot of English translations will say primacy. It's actually plural. So it's debatable on what that even means. I'm not aware of anybody at Chalcedon disputing the fact that Rome was the primate. They may have said that their reading of the canon is different, but that doesn't equate some sort of a falsification. It's an interpolation. It was. There's no doubt about it. If Craig wants to read a nice little article on the interpolation of Canon 6 by the East, because there was interpolations by Rome and the East with this canon. Look up the canonist I said, the Eastern Orthodox canonist. His name's Peter Lahulier. So L''Huller. Yeah, I think that's how you spell it. But if you Google Peter Lahulier, Canons and Ecclesiology of the Council of Nicaea, he goes through some of the history of the textual interpolations of that canon. Now, the other question was the issue of Sardica and how they were appended to the Council of Nicaea. Good question. It leaves a lot of historians mystified. I really don't know why they did. It's very possible that they saw it as one council because it may have been written on one side and then the canons of Sardica on the other. It could have been that when Hosius of Cordoba was the president at the Council of Nicaea, he was also the president of the Council of Sardica. It's quite possible that because they saw that the same leadership was at both councils, that it could be appended together in one document, and then it just got forgotten that these were at two different times and places. But really, we don't really know. It doesn't really factor in the debate between East and West, though, because the East was already appealing to Sardica in the 4th century in order to resolve disputes in the East.
Okay.
Drew, what else do you have for us?
All right. Well, we've got a couple of questions from Jay Dyer here. And Jay, I do apologize in advance. I did kind of paraphrase your comments to make them more questions, to give Eric an opportunity to respond. So if you have some issue with that, throw it up in the chat and because I want to make sure I'm actually accurately representing your statement. So first question is, why would it be correct just because a pre-schismatic pope did it? And also a kind of a follow-up to that, saying that just because there's a claim of being first and being the See of Peter, saying that does not quite equal papal infallibility or prove universal jurisdiction, because you end up reading later developments into the early church. And he says that, or it looks like he says that primarily because papal dogmas evolve over time.
Okay. Well, I would concede all of those points. You know, just because a pre-schism pope says something doesn't mean that it's right. You know, that also goes for Eastern saints. For that matter, if you want to get real technical, if you want to get into the pure neutral position, just because ecumenical councils say something doesn't mean that it's right. So it all depends on, you know, some of this is an epistemological issue. So there are some people out there who have a very individualized understanding of illumination, which we can get to later in more detail. But there are some people out there who are willing to go with the idea that the criteria of truth is truth itself. Okay. So if a pope says the truth, then he's right. If he doesn't, then he's wrong. If a council is right, then it's right. It just so happens to be right. So I would never argue that just because a pope says something, that makes it true. What I would say is, without trying to make a geometric proof here, we're building a case for the belief in the divine institution of the Roman primacy. The first thing you would look at is who believed this idea. If it's not just one person, if it's not just 5 persons, if it's not just 100 persons, but it's hundreds of persons over hundreds of years, then it can't be thrown off the table just out of hand.
Okay, I see what you're saying. And just to kind of help condense that down into a bit more, I guess for lack of a better term, digestible kind of a bite there for people. So when you say you're building a case, you're not really going for, say, proof in the mathematical or a ton or super duper evidence like we wouldn't say scientific exploration, but more from the legalistic sense. You to kind of pull from Matt Dillahunty's bag, you're accusing the Roman papacy of having primacy, and you're using all these arguments from early church history and ecumenical councils, the canons and whatnot, as evidence to build your case to declare the papacy being guilty of primacy.
Yeah, so
right?
You're absolutely right, Thomas. I mean, that's what you're basically hinting at here is there's different kinds of evidence that are permitted in the legal form, right? You have video evidence, which is usually indisputable, unless there's twins involved, right? There's corroborative evidence, which is not as face-to-face. It's not as drop, knock them out, drag them out. But it's not simply thrown away just because it's not that golden nugget that everybody would like. Now, if we want to get technical, everybody could have believed in the papacy in the first 10 centuries, and that still wouldn't mean it's true. I mean, it all depends on how neutral you want to get, right?
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that I was understanding exactly what you were saying here. And I guess Michael, you were saying you want to kind of get to calls here in just a moment.
But before that, let me just ask something that Jay is asking. He's asking, could he come on the show and debate you about this issue of epistemology when it comes to, how do we know authority and things like that? If I'm understanding him correctly, don't know if you want to respond to that.
Yeah, I mean, I would prefer it to be on our show just because, I'm looking out for our interests.
Yeah, he's saying he would come on here to reason in theology. He's saying if he could come on here and debate you on epistemology, which I'm fine with. So.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, yeah, absolutely. So we'll get out, we'll hash out the details here shortly. But yeah, Drew, if you want to call out the phone number and we can start taking some live calls, and then we can, after that, come back to some, more chat questions.
Okay.
If time permits. Don't know what your schedule's looking like, Eric.
For me,
yeah.
I'm good to go.
Okay. All right.
There was one more kind of really interesting statement from somebody in the chat. Do you mind if I throw that one out real quick before we throw out the number?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. This was from listener or watcher, Enlightened Soy-Based Neo-Human. He or she states, Mirari Vos cannot be reconciled with Vatican II. Now, Mirari Vos was something that I haven't heard in quite a long time, and so figured you might be interested in responding to that.
So what was the question? That
it wasn't a question so much as a statement saying that Mirari Vos is unable to be reconciled with Vatican II.
I see what you're saying. Well, I mean, we'd probably have to do a show on that. But what exactly does this person see as a contradiction? Because there's a variety of things that people could say is a contradiction. So maybe,
I think it looks, they're throwing this up right now. And even Jay seems to be agreeing with them, saying that Mirari Vos is utterly incompatible. And Enlightened pops back, showing, asking, how does Vatican II not promote indifferentism?
Yeah, well, yeah. So Vatican II does not promote indifferentism because it rejects it. There are some statements that are made at Vatican II which can give that impression. And a lot of us are unhappy about that. But if you read Lumen Gentium, chapters 14 to 16, in the 16th chapter, it makes it very clear, 16th paragraph rather, it makes it clear that whoever knows that the Catholic Church is true, whoever is aware of the claims of the Catholic Church and does not enter into the Catholic Church cannot be saved. So Vatican II supports the necessity of precept that's resting on every human being as a divine obligation to believe in Jesus Christ and to receive baptism from the Catholic Church.
Okay.
I see that if anybody wants to come on Zoom, if they're asking if they want to come on,
looks like Jay said, he'd be willing to come on and discuss and interact with some of this. Do you want me to?
Yeah, I've got the time. Yeah, I've got the time. Yeah.
Okay. Well, let me do that, and we'll come back to the live questions, at the end of that, because I want to give Jay the opportunity to respond. So let me just privately send him to the link. But maybe Drew, go ahead and ask another chat question.
Sure. Yeah, I was actually going to throw another update on the tail end of the Mirari Vos issue. With Vatican II, and this is going to be the last follow-up I do on this one, because it was a question that kind of raised to me as well. One of the biggest issues of this indifferentism, I think, and Enlightened Soy-Based Neo-Human brings this up, talking about how the Pope seems to indicate that there is possible salvation outside of the church, such as in instances where he's been seen, I think he was seen lighting a menorah, and also praying to Mecca or answering the Islamic call to prayer. Now, to me, I don't really see much of an issue with this, just because they're all three Abrahamic religions. But of course, there's different belief schema across the board with all three of these belief structures. So I figured I'd give you a chance to go after that.
Yeah. So this is a theological development over the centuries. Okay. We see roots of this way back in the 4th century. The first that comes to my mind is the funeral service of Theodosius I, the Emperor Theodosius I. He did not receive baptism. Okay, so canonically, traditionally, Theodosius I was not a member of the Catholic Church. But if you read the funeral service of Theodosius, which is conducted by Saint Ambrose, who is venerated by the East, venerated by the West, he says that he received baptism. He received the grace of baptism by virtue of his devotion. And the idea is that he had a desire that was sufficient to match the gift of salvation that he would have gotten if he entered into the font of baptism.
Okay, I see.
So right there, if you bring a microscope just into that event, Ambrose is a seed to this idea that while the visible constitution of the church is necessary for salvation, there are at times a way to establish an invisible bond to the visible church. And the theologians have teased that out over the centuries. And far before Vatican II, we see Pope Pius IX, who to my knowledge is not deposed by any sedevacantists that I have ever spoken with. Pope Pius IX himself believed that it was possible to obtain salvation outside the visible bounds of the church.
Okay, I see what you're saying there. Also, Michael, I know you're kind of muted.
Yeah, Jay is going to be joining us here any second. I sent him the link and said he's getting started right now. So
okay, and also if Jay is willing, after he and Eric have their discussion, I did pull a couple of random questions out of the chat that are directed more towards someone of the Eastern Orthodox persuasion, and he might be inclined to answer those if he's
sure. That'll be fine, and then I think we can get to some live calls after that.
Awesome, sounds great.
I don't want to take them right now. I want to give Jay the opportunity to respond. Maybe ask just one more quick question while he's getting ready.
Okay, sure thing. Let me see if I can find someone that seems. Okay, this one from Thomas Comerford. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Sorry if I butchered it. Is how do we reconcile the papacy being a necessary aspect of the church while throwing away the primacy of Rome, Alexandria, and Antioch?
So the idea is that by accepting Rome, we're rejecting Alexandria and Antioch?
I'm not sure. It's asking about the necessity of the papacy, the papal aspect of the church, while it seems to eschew the primacy of Rome, Alexandria, and Antioch. That seems to be more the core of the question.
Okay, well, for centuries, the church has accepted the primacies, plural, of the church, and that development kind of reached a peak with the Pentarchy, where you have Rome at the top, Alexandria number 2, Constantinople number 2, Alexandria number 3, Antioch number 4, Jerusalem number 4. And it's sometimes you have readers of history see that this Pentarchic formation is sort of a damper on the idea of an individualized Roman papacy. But some of the foremost defenders of the Pentarchy, like Saint Nicephorus of Constantinople in the 8th or 9th century, Saint Theodore of the Studite Monastery, many other Byzantine theologians and scholars, never saw this as some sort of an infringement on the universal primacy of the Pope. In fact, at the Council of Constantinople, 861, you had the legates of the Pope come and say that the Pope has the right to intervene on a disciplinary matter in the East. And the bishops from the East there, the spokesman, because the legates spoke Latin, right? So in this council, you had the Latins were speaking, and then the Greeks somebody had to translate it, then the Greeks had to respond. Theodore of Balsamon, I want to say, is the man who was Greek who knew Latin, and he responded saying that the Council of Constantinople admits that Rome has this right. So none of that really infringes upon the rights of the First See. But I think where where this questioner is coming from is basically, you have 4 other patriarchates, for goodness sake. If Rome falls into heresy, then we've got 4 other ones. Well, if that is true, then that is true, but we'd have to look at the evidence for that.
All right. Well, Eric, we have Jay on. Jay, how are you? Welcome back to the show.
Good. I'm doing well. Thanks for having me back. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me give you a chance to maybe interact with Eric, but I want to make sure that it's structured, that y'all get even time. Would it be okay that maybe I don't know if y'all want to do maybe just a back and forth free for all, or do y'all want to maybe do something that's timed?
No,
I don't care.
This is not a
okay.
Moderated.
Okay, so we can do maybe a moderated debate another time. Why don't y'all just do a free for all, back and forth chat in that case?
Well, one thing I would say is that initially listening to what Eric's saying about the Canon 6 of Nicaea first, and then I want to talk about the pre-Vatican II papal encyclicals, which I've read extensively. I have a lot of familiarity with that. But first thing I would say is that if you look at Canon 6 of Nicaea, it's correct. It is talking about the Pope's regional jurisdiction. Now, what Eric seemed to do was to assume that we all know that it was just assumed that his universal jurisdiction was already understood. But in fact, if you read the canon, the only statement that gives universality there is the council saying that the universal limitations are to be in effect. So it's very odd that this canon would speak this way, and we're just supposed to assume that it was understood that it was universal in terms of his not just local, but also his primacy over the entire church throughout the world, right? And again, I'm stressing that it likens the jurisdiction locally to the other patriarchates, and then it specifically states that it says this is to be understood universally. So the limitation is what's universal, and what Eric and most of the papal apologists do is they have the Vatican I mindset that they read back into these ancient things. And what's amazing about that is that Eric himself admits that essentially when he says that there's an evolution of this understanding when he talks about baptism of desire. I agree with him that in the Roman Catholic theology, there is an evolution of this doctrine. That's literally how Roman Catholicism has defended the doctrine of the papacy, is because it's a seed, I think Newman talks about it this way, that grows into an entire tree of understanding. That's not the Orthodox doctrine. The Orthodox doctrine is that theology has always remained the same from the time of the apostles, and it gets explicated in a more precise way. So what those councils, the Sixth Council, whatever it is, what they're teaching, it's not a new doctrine. It's not an evolution of understanding. It's the exact same doctrines that are just made more precise. That's why the words like hypostasis, energeia, they're not from Aristotle. Aristotle might have used those terms, but they're actually from the Greek New Testament. So when it comes to the Second Vatican Council stuff that he's talking about, that Lumen Gentium and Dignitatis Humanae and all these different documents in Vatican II are perfectly in line with the traditional teaching because the understanding has evolved. And he then tries to defend the idea that the saying that Islam has the same God as Christianity can be defended on the basis of baptism of desire. I mean, this is utterly ridiculous. That's how far the baptism of desire nonsense has gone to defend everything that was in previous Vatican II statements to completely contradict that. For example, if you look at Mortalium Animos, which is Pius XI's encyclical on pan-religious ceremonies, it says that this is an action of apostasy that promotes indifferentism. Nobody can deny that a CC1 and a CC2 of John Paul and then Ratzinger have promoted this indifferentism. Nobody can actually honestly read the apostolic canons and the canons of the 6th and 7th council that forbid praying in synagogues or in heretical sects in their services, and then say that the actions of these men are not promoting indifferentism or a participation in that. Now, I can definitely prove to you that in all traditional moral theology, in the Roman system, if you participate in those actions, you're participating in sin, you're participating in apostasy. And in Roman Catholic canon law, it's very clear, even in the new code of canon law, you incur an ipso facto excommunication when you participate in actions of schism, heresy, and apostasy. There's other sins too, like procuring an abortion, that procures a late sententiae ipso facto excommunication. Now, it's true that in Roman Catholic theology, the Pope, you can debate whether that can be the case with the Pope, right? Because that's the whole nature of that system, is that after Vatican I, no one can judge the first see. So the Pope can do these things because no one can judge the first see, even though ironically, he can commit actions that even Aquinas says in the Summa. Aquinas says in one of the replies, if someone were to pray at the tomb of Muhammad, he would be considered an apostate. And nobody can deny that Pope Urban II calling the Crusades against Islam, and now we have a Pope praying in mosques, the blue mosque towards Mecca. Those are actions of apostasy. There's no way to defend that. The only way to defend that is to come back by saying, well, these are just sins of the Pope, and we all know that popes can sin. The answer is no. It's not just a matter of sins. It's a matter of heresy, apostasy, and schism. Those are specific sins that remove one from the body of Christ. And the ancient canons are explicit that you can't participate in the services of open, bald-faced heretics.
Wow, it's a lot there.
Yeah, hey, there's a lot there. Yeah, Eric, go ahead and jump in here, and let's get some interaction.
Okay. So let's get back to Canon 6 of Nicaea. You know, Jay makes the point that this is the only universal idea here is that there's limited jurisdictions, and that we need to rely on a seed to tree transition in order to get to the papacy. But as I was saying at the beginning, we only have 15 years after this, where the very president of the Council of Nicaea, Osius of Cordoba, was presiding at the Council of Serdica. Now, as Jay knows, I'm sure he knows, the Council of Serdica was a response to a papal overturn of the deposition of Athanasius, Paul of Constantinople, Marcellus of Ancyra, and two other Eastern bishops who were deposed by the semi-closely Arian bishops of the East, who were led by Eusebius of Nicomedia. So at the Council of Tyre, however you want to pronounce it, in 335, and at the Council of Jerusalem at the same year, Athanasius and four other bishops were deposed. Those bishops were called to the Roman See, and after Pope Julius had examined their confession, he wrote letters overturning the decisions of the Eastern See, of the Eastern Council, and provided them letters restoring them to their position as bishops. Now, what does that tell us? That could just mean that, hey, there's one, Rome's the only Orthodox church at the time. Rome was willing to help. Rome puts in her 2 cents. Hey, you know, it could mean that. But we have contemporary historians who, well, they're not exactly contemporary, but they're only 1 century later. They're not into the post-schism, epistemologically scholastic gluttonous people. We're talking about Theodoret of Cyrus, who's a Greek historian. I know he came under a dark cloud, but he was a historian. You have Socrates, who's a Greek lawyer and a historian who was living in Constantinople in 445. You have Sozomen, who's also a Greek historian living in Constantinople at the time. And I could read for you how they understood this whole interaction with Athanasius, Julius, and the Eastern bishops. Theodoret says, this is how Socrates summarized Athanasius's restoration. He says, quote, "There, each bishop from the East laid his case before Julius, Bishop of Rome, who sent them back again into the East, restoring them to their respective sees by virtue of his letters, in the exercise of the Church of Rome's particular privilege, and at the same time in the liberty of that prerogative, sharply rebuking those by whom they had been deposed."
Yeah, this
Close quote. Hold on a second. So before we were hearing that Rome's locked down to Rome. Alexandria is locked down to the provinces under Alexandria.
no.
Antioch's locked down to those seas. And what we
This
have
is
here,
this is I'm sorry, this is ridiculous. By saying that somebody has a local jurisdiction, that does not mean that people don't make appeals to outside of those jurisdictions. This is common in the history of the church. This is well known.
Okay, well, but let me go on. I'll give you a Sozomen's understanding here. He says, so the Roman bishop, on learning the accusations against each individual and on finding that they held the same sentiments about the Nicene dogmas, admitted them to communion as of like orthodoxy, and as the case for all was fitting to the dignity of his see.
Mm-hmm.
As the case for all was fitting to the dignity of his see, he restored them all to their own churches. Now, we know that this was an exercise of jurisdiction. How? Because the Eusebian bishops wrote back and said, you can't do that. And they cited the canons of Nicaea to try and show that Pope Julius could not do that. So we have a few options here. We could say, yeah, this is just, Rome's just one of those Orthodox sees that, they were like the Mike Tyson of the time, and they had really good influence, and we could get there and we get them to write a letter and we can go back to the East and Or there's some legal right here that's being appealed to that has prior precedent.
Yeah, Eric, the legal right is what comes out of the synods and the honor that's given to the first see. If you are familiar, for example,
what synod gave this to the Roman see?
No, I'm saying that over time, that understanding is given to the first see, right?
Right, but we're talking about this at this moment in time. Which
the appellate structure is fine. I've never heard an Orthodox person disagree with that idea. Let me give you an example from Orthodox ecclesiology, right? So in the Russian Orthodox Church in America, we have the first hierarch, right? His name is Metropolitan Hilarion. He's the first hierarch of the Russian Orthodox Church outside of Russia and in North America, right? So if there was an issue, he has a place of venerated authority, right? But he has no more bishopric than anybody else. But he does have a position of first hierarch, and it is a venerated thing. It is a powerful position. And in the same way, the Patriarch of Moscow has a very powerful position. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that outside of the norms of canon law, that he operates in some kind of special de vino. It's custom, right? That's what Canon 6 of Nicaea appeals to is custom. It's not an appellate to what is de vine, in our view, right? So absolutely, there is a long history of Rome being Orthodox, and nobody denies that. I mean, I'm very thankful that St. Maximus can appeal to Rome, that St. Athanasius can appeal to Rome. But if you read the letters of St. Athanasius, you will see many instances where appeals and issues are made to him as the Pope of Alexandria. That was his title. That's still a title of the Alexandrian Patriarchate, because the ecumenical councils gave the Alexandrian Patriarchate the title Pope. And in the same way, that's our view of the Roman system in the placement of the councils, is that it did occupy the first place, because nobody denies that Peter occupies the first place. But here's the thing: occupying the first place and having a canonical appellate system in no way, in our view, justifies the later accruing and evolution to where he alone sits in judgment upon all theological matters and make pronouncements ex cathedra, and he alone is given the charism of infallibility. That's the problem here, is that you can say all of these things that we would agree with, and you can try to reinterpret them. But I would just say, even Ratzinger in Introduction to Christianity, he says very clearly that there needs to be a tempering of the view of Vatican I, because the Orthodox perspective on synodal government was the perspective of the church in the first millennium. Ratzinger admits that in Introduction to Christianity, the supposed bastion of conservative. Yes, he does. He absolutely does. That's exactly what he says. Do you want me to read? I can read you the quotes. You want me to read them?
Well, we can get to that. I wrote a whole article on that, but I'd like to get back to what I was saying here with the Council of Nicaea.
Okay, but see, what I want to show is that throughout the discussion that I've heard, I've listened to the whole show, what you've done is essentially read back into these ancient statements, the Vatican I view, but you've also admitted that there's this evolution of dogma. And so just as there's an evolution of dogma that you admit about baptism of desire, backing up the idea that the Pope can now pray in the mosque and whatnot, or that people can be saved in other religions, in the same way, we are saying there's an evolution of dogma when it comes to the idea of the first see. Look at the way Catholic apologists will cite Irenaeus when he talks about why the Rome is the first see. He says because it's Peter and Paul. He doesn't mention anything about a special promise to Peter. He doesn't mention anything about infallibility. He says it's the doubly apostolic see, Peter and Paul. That's why every Orthodox icon has Peter and Paul holding the church, right? Because
I get annoyed too when I hear papal apologists appealing to Irenaeus. But I'm going back to this issue about Canon 6, because the claim was that this shows that there was limited jurisdictions.
Correct.
But I'm bringing to the table some alternative information here that kind of takes away from it subtracts from your argument.
Because again, we don't have a problem with the appellate structure. So if extenuating circumstances were such that my entire jurisdiction, this would could even happen now. Like, let's say that my entire area of Orthodoxy, say they believed in, I don't know, they adopted Arianism. Let's say that all the Orthodox around me adopted Arianism, and I went to and appealed to the first hierarch of the Russian Orthodox Church in America, Metropolitan Hillary. Now, let's say he adopted Arianism for the sake of argument. Now, he hasn't, but let's say he had. I could then, if he adopted Arianism, I could appeal elsewhere outside of him to a more respected metropolitan area. And that's what we see in that structure that develops in the councils of the metropolitans, the pentarchy as it's called. They're interchangeable. People come and they go in this pentarchy. There's nothing magical about pentarchy, but eventually they become kind of normative. Then you get later patriarchates added, like Moscow, right? So there's nothing. We don't believe that what happens in ecumenical councils or in canon law, even though it's normative, it's not necessarily divine. It's not necessarily divine law, because it's a little more flexible in church history. You have to do the principle of economia, right? And I think Roman Catholic canon law, people would admit that there's such a thing as economia, where local bishops have to make a decision about how to receive converts in XYZ circumstances, right? So that's economia. So there's a little more flexibility when it comes to canon law, whereas if it's divine law, and certainly canon law reflects divine law, but when it's divine law, you can't be flexible, right? Like, we can't change moral law and say, oh, well, now, homosexuality is of God, right? And then like 50 years ago, it wasn't. Although, again, I'm not trying to be mean here, but, Francis has literally just said this. He just said 50 years ago, the death penalty was moral. We now no longer understand that to be the case. So again, there's this constant innovating and kind of evolving is the whole point. So
let me get a chance to say something here. Maybe I could reframe this response to you, Jay. I can be an Eastern Orthodox Christian and deny your argument on Canon 6. Does that make sense?
I mean, I suppose hypothetically you could, but
because the reason why is because you just spent 5 minutes conceding what I've been saying here.
No.
That the Roman See had a universal appellate jurisdiction.
No. Any of the important sees could be appealed to. For example, Athanasius gets appealed to at times, right? And if he gets persecuted, where's he going to appeal? He's going to appeal to the first see, right? But being,
hold on, let me go ahead and continue.
Listen, being the first in the appellate structure does not equate to universal jurisdiction in terms of infallibility. Now, if the church is in a crisis situation and you have, like in the Arian crisis, only a handful of bishops that are Orthodox, it absolutely makes sense why you would have the, there's even a term, what's the term in Roman canon law, where in extremis, right? You could have an in extremis situation, which was not the norm, because actually the ancient canons say that you have to have multiple bishops present from the local metropolitan to ordain any new bishop, right? By the way, why did all that change after the second millennium, and now only the Pope ordains the bishops, right? So obviously there's a change in the view, because prior to that, the ancient canons do not say the Pope confirms every bishopric in the world.
Right. So yeah, let me get some space here, though. You know, you talked about the appellate structure of the Orthodox Church. That's all I would have to appeal to in order to show that your argument on Canon 6 is wrong.
No, you have no argument on Canon 6 because you admit that there's nothing there except, oh, wait, it's not actually mentioned, it's just assumed. And let me show you that this guy who was at the council later in the extreme situation with the Arians did X, Y, Z. No, it's not there in the canon at all, because
well,
not how the church viewed it.
But this is what the listeners have. The listeners.
No, listen. Appellate structure to the.
How are we going to have an exchange here if you're?
It doesn't prove universal jurisdiction and infallibility.
Yeah, I gotta have some space here to talk, Michael.
Yeah, go ahead. Jump in here, Eric.
Okay, so at the Council of Sardica, this is what the bishop father said. They said, quote, "For this will seem to be most good and very proper, if to the head, that is, to the See of Peter, the bishops of the Lord shall refer from all the provinces of the world." So I don't have to defend papal infallibility and all this other highfalutin stuff in order to refute what Jay was saying about Canon 6. The argument that Jay was making about Canon 6 is that there's only limited jurisdictions. The text is in his article there. And yet what we see admitted 15 years later is a universal appellate jurisdiction. And it's stated in Canon 3, Canon 4, and Canon 5 of Sardica. Any bishop anywhere in the world can appeal.
You just ignored the entire argument that I made. If I appealed to the first hierarch of Rocor, that doesn't mean that he has jurisdiction over all of America because he's called the first hierarch.
No, go ahead and respond.
Yeah, you can appeal. Whoever you appeal to at the highest level has an appellate jurisdiction.
Correct.
Yes. So that's what I'm saying here.
That's not infallibility.
But my argument was the table set here for this evening was not papal infallibility.
That is bound up with the doctrine. You have to defend that at Canon 6 of Nicaea.
No, we can get to papal infallibility, but I would never go to where I'm going to in order to prove that.
Obviously not, because it's not there.
I agree.
Because
I agree. So
if you
words,
agree it's not, you agree it's not there. So papal infallibility involves?
No. In the survived data of the Council of Nicaea, there's no evidence of papal infallibility. So there's no evidence of iconography. There's no evidence of the essence and energy distinction.
No, you're wrong.
See what I'm saying? So
you don't know about the essence energy distinction in that regard. Have you read Dionysius?
What I'm saying here is I'm using a certain circumscribed amount of data to argue that your argument about the limitation of Rome's jurisdiction is wrong. I'm not arguing for papal infallibility. I'm not arguing.
That is part of the argument, even though
all I would have to do is appeal to what you just said.
No, you have for your argument. Listen, for your argument to hold,
Eastern Orthodox Church
you just ignored the argument and restated the position.
The patriarchal structure of receiving appeals is all I would have to appeal to. In order to show
it refutes you.
Rome at the time could hear appeals from anywhere else in the world, and
all of the patriarchates could.
No.
Yes, they could. Yes, they could. Athanasius heard appeals.
Okay, I understand Athanasius heard appeals, but
does that mean that Athanasius had a universal jurisdiction over everybody who appealed to him? For your argument to hold, that's what you'd have to say. That's why.
I wouldn't defend that at all. There were several.
That's what you have to say. That's what you have to say for your argument.
Let me give you an example, Jay. I can give you a perfect example. Okay, there was a bishop underneath the Patriarchate of Constantinople in the 6th century. His name was John of Chalcedon. He was accused of believing, I want to say he was accused of a Gnostic or being a Pelagian. And he appealed above his immediate synod to the Patriarch of Constantinople. Mm-hmm. So the Patriarch of Constantinople set up court. They had a tribunal, and they found him guilty. So John of Chalcedon lodged an appeal to Rome. It happened to be St. Gregory the Great at the time. John showed his case to Pope Gregory, and Pope Gregory overturned that decision because he found out that they were misunderstanding what he was saying.
Right.
And he sent letters back to Constantinople saying this man deserves his see back. Okay. Mm-hmm. That we're not getting into papal infallibility.
We have to include papal infallibility. That's part of the argument, even though you don't want to go there. That is part of the argument.
Look, Jay, there is something called, setting off an argument and choosing to go to another argument at a different time. If I wanted to argue for papal infallibility, I would have started on an entirely different footing here.
No, so but see, that's the thing is that you're not representing. No. That's not the debate. It's not a singular debate.
That's the rule of debate. It's a basic rule of debate, Jay.
No, it's not.
I'm not here arguing.
We're arguing worldviews. We're arguing.
If you want, I could switch to papal infallibility, but that's not what I'm talking about right now.
Yeah, right. Because all you're doing is appealing to an appellate structure, which doesn't prove the thing that you need to prove. All it's proving is that there's an appellate structure, and nobody disagrees.
Okay, so what you're saying is that all I need to come to this.
Have to do is give you one example, like Athanasius.
Besides what I came to prove, I don't understand. That doesn't make any sense to me.
That's not how worldviews work. That's why you're not a good philosopher. That's why on the epistemic issue, you're also going to be crushed.
Okay, but
answer Erick's question.
We can get to the epistemic issue, but I guess we'll put a period here, and we'll let the readers and the listeners judge. Jay said that there's no other jurisdiction besides the limited metropolitan.
Appealing is not giving universal jurisdiction.
Okay,
listen.
There's not a single historian that denies that Rome had an appellate jurisdiction.
Why you're stuck.
And that it was unlimited.
If Athanasius gets appealed to outside of his jurisdiction, does that mean he has a jurisdiction beyond his jurisdiction?
No. Here's what I'm trying to.
That just proves your argument.
No, it doesn't refute my argument because it's conceded by the Eastern Orthodox canon law that you could appeal to Rome in the first 10 centuries.
Prove universal jurisdiction and infallibility, and those go together because that's what evolved. That's what we're here to argue against. We're not here to argue against your particular papacy.
That's what you came to argue. But the title of the video, Jay, was Canon 6 of Nicaea. Okay, so look.
The papacy is a thing that it stands or falls together. It's a whole thing.
Right. Okay. And that's not exactly true.
That's totally true. It's a house of cards. It stands or falls together.
Okay. So you're saying that we cannot discuss the Council of Nicaea without discussing the clown masses of today? Is that your argument?
You can talk about it, but I'm talking about papal infallibility and all the papal claims and the universal temporal jurisdiction that all goes into it that later evolved. That needs to be there in Nicaea, and it's not. You admit that there's no
So let me ask you something. You said that they don't believe in development of doctrine.
Correct.
Do we see anything about icons in the Council of Nicaea?
We do have evidence of iconography from the earliest days of the church. Absolutely.
Yeah, we have evidence of iconography, but I don't know of any evidence of the specific venerating doctrine at Council of Nicaea 787. Do you have any
yes, no,
textual?
It's the same. If you read John Damascus's argumentation for St. Theodore's
John Damascus, that's
if you read their argumentation on why we venerate icons, they appeal to the 1st and 2nd century fathers, particularly things like relics and the Eucharist. So yes, there is the earliest day veneration of those.
Right, but so what we have here is some evidence, but you have to tease it out, you have to develop it, you have to bring out more of what's there. But
that is not an evolving of doctrine. Evidence. Explicating what's already there is not an evolving of doctrine.
Okay, well, call it that. Call it explicating.
That's a big difference because the Vatican I theologians like Newman argued for development and evolution of dogma. That's why your Vatican II church doesn't teach what the First Millennium Church taught.
Okay, but despite what you say, all of the scholars are in agreement.
What I say, the scholars. Does the Pope pray in Mecca or towards Mecca in the Blue Mosque?
Well, what scholar are you referring to that can tell you that
I don't have
the bishops of the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th century were teaching the doctrine of Nicaea too?
I don't have to appeal because I've actually read those fathers. I don't have to appeal to scholars. I can tell you about the way that the early fathers talked about the relics, the way they talked about the bones of the saints, the way they talked about the Eucharist, the way they talked about all of those principles that went into the worship and liturgy of the church. We have liturgies from those days.
Right, but the specific doctrine of Nicaea
that's not evolution. Explicating the doctrine is not the doctrine of evolution of dogma.
Well, I would stand here and say all we need to do is explicate what's already there. And that's what I understand by theological development. So if we could touch,
but that's not what Vatican II and the Roman Catholic Church have done, especially in the second.
Okay, well that's an assertion. It's a gratuitous one, but I'm telling you,
I gave you Mortalium Animos that says that pan-religious ceremonies and praying together are indifferentism and apostasy.
Okay, we can get to that, but
I
want to close off what we.
That's a very clear argument. You're defending a structure that does this.
Okay, we're talking. Look, Jay, the listeners who are listening to this, they want to know if what you're saying
trick doesn't work. This trick doesn't work because you're having to defend men that pray in mosques and in synagogues towards Mecca.
Okay, we can discuss what the early church fathers believed.
Yeah, you don't want to go there.
Or you can go to the clown mass argument.
You know, in fairness, do not a number of Eastern Orthodox clergy do the same?
Correct.
I mean, they were there.
Our church is not built on one bishop.
Okay, but Eric, what would you say in response to that?
Yeah, we could have another show on all the things that have been going on in Orthodoxy since the 1920s.
Our church is not built on one bishop.
I understand. When did you join the Orthodox Church, Jay?
No, we're not here to debate my personal matters. We're not here to deflect away.
No, I'm not saying when.
This is why you're not an honest actor, because when you get
the reason why I'm asking
down issues, this is what you do.
Jay, the reason why I'm asking you is not to find out how long you've been an Orthodox Christian. Sure. I'm asking you, did you come into the Orthodox Church when Bartholomew was the Bishop of Constantinople in good relations with Russia?
No.
So the time that you came into Orthodoxy, the precise day that you came into Orthodoxy,
you were not. This is not how Orthodox canon law works, by the way.
But okay. So when you came into Orthodoxy, was Kirill in canonical peace with Bartholomew?
I didn't come in under Kirill. I came in under the Antiochians, and then I moved to the Russian Orthodox.
Okay, so you were under John then of Antioch. Okay, was John in canonical peace with Bartholomew?
I was under the local bishop of America, right? So again, having a metropolitan does not mean that he is the Pope over us. It's the first.
No, I understand. I understand, but the Orthodox Church takes communion very seriously. Am I right? Okay.
Correct.
So was John of Antioch in canonical communion with Bartholomew of Constantinople.
Correct, he was, as far as I recall. Yeah.
So when you say amen at the altar at your local parish that cites John and Bartholomew.
So the way that Orthodox canon law works is that we don't immediately say that a person who makes an error or says something, it's not like the whole church is guilty of that. Right. And I would,
why can't you give us the same benefit then?
Because it's 60 years of this. That's why.
Okay. So 1920 to 2020, that's 100.
Well, no, there's just two different arguments here of the Patriarch of Constantinople present day committing pan-religious heretical type actions versus what was going on 100 years ago. Now, if you could demonstrate,
so Anglican indifferentism with the Anglican Episcopal.
No. If you could read Father Peter Here's book on the history of ecumenism, where he shows that the origins of ecumenism were missionary efforts, and then it was basically co-opted.
Okay. Well, in any case, we're dealing with what happened when you came into the Orthodox Church.
Correct.
And if you want, we could talk about when I became a Catholic.
That's the reason I moved.
You came on the show to expose all these problems about me being in communion with Pope Francis. I think you should extend the courtesy of me turning the tables. So when you came into
that's
the
why
Orthodox
I left.
Church,
I moved away from that communion very quickly.
You were in communion with a priest who's in communion with a bishop.
Yeah, 2 months versus 70 years of Vatican II. 2 months versus 70 years.
With John of Antioch.
2 months versus 70 years.
With Bartholomew of Constantinople.
2 months versus 70 years.
So what happens if Kirill joins back with Bartholomew? Are you going to go elsewhere?
Again, the way that it works canonically is that it's not like overnight. If a person chooses to do that, if that's upon their conscience, that's ultimately up for God to judge. But typically what would happen is there would be a synodal situation. And so that's why it was actually a big move for Kirill to not be in communion with the Greeks. That was the right action. That was the right move. So that's part of the reason why I went to the Russian Orthodox Church. I don't think that everybody in the Antiochian Church is automatically damned. I don't think that everybody who's in good faith in the Roman Catholic Church is automatically damned. But I think that the structure, and I mean, again, we would say there's a difference between the way the Church Fathers, the way canon law talks about, whether it's Eastern or Western, the first millennium, talks about bald-faced heresy, right? And this is usually referring to people who have obstinately been preaching this for a long time. And I would say that 70 years of Vatican II, 60 years, whatever it is bald-faced and is obstinate. And that's different from people in these various churches who don't know what's going on. I will extend that grace. That's why I will begin discussions with any Roman Catholic on good terms and in good faith, because I don't expect that everybody has all this figured out. I mean, I certainly didn't for a long time, and I would extend that to you. But all I've seen from you, Eric, is this sort of a continual hard-headedness about these issues.
Well,
Eric, go ahead and respond to that. What would you say about you being hard-headed? What would be your comments on that?
Yeah, I mean, what all I'm doing here is reversing the statements, and I'm appealing to history. I'm appealing to fathers. I'm appealing to councils. I'm appealing to your own saints. I'm appealing to current canon Orthodox law to show that your argument on Canon 6 of Nicaea was wrong.
Yeah, but it wasn't. I don't think your arguments worked.
But you yourself refuted it by appealing to Orthodox appellate jurisdiction.
Nope. That disproves universal jurisdiction. I don't know how many times I have to tell you that if
we're talking about your argument about Canon 6.
Athanasius doesn't have universal jurisdiction because people from outside of his jurisdiction appealed to him, that neither does Rome.
Okay, so let me touch on that point, Jay, about Athanasius and everything, because I want to help you out there. In the year 861,
I think you need help, bro.
In the year 861, the Council of Constantinople. Have you read the acts of that council?
Yes.
Okay, so if you read the acts of the Council of Constantinople 861, which is the council that legates from Rome went initially to Constantinople to investigate the issue of Photius versus Ignatius.
Yes, right? Glad you went there.
Right. So was Nicholas appealed to?
By the way, you're wrong about that. Did you know that actually is the Eastern Synod that the Pope affirmed and then later reversed?
No, the Pope never
Yes.
affirmed that council.
Yes, he did. Yes, he did.
No, he didn't.
Yes, I prove it right there. There's your link.
861, Jay, not 869, not 879.
Oh, I'm not worried about that.
1. I asked you if you read the Acts of the Council of Constantinople, 861.
Yeah, but again, what does that have to do with Athanasius?
Oh, excuse me. Did you read the Council of Constantinople, 861?
What does that have to do with Athanasius?
Well, because I'm following upon this, a good point that you brought up is just because Athanasius receives appeals from other sees, that doesn't mean he has jurisdiction over those sees. So I want to follow up with that. Okay, that's why I said I want to help. I want to help the discussion. I want to help the listeners here.
Yeah.
So at the Council of 861, I just want to know, did you read, because I want to know if I have to
Unless
explain.
I'm mistaken, I believe I've read that.
Okay, all right. So I just want to know if I have to explain it. I'm not trying to, ask you if you read it because I don't want, that you don't know about it. That's not what I'm saying. Because if not, then I have to do a little bit of explaining. But Photius of Constantinople sent a letter to Pope Nicholas saying, hey, I'm in the chair now. Pope Nicholas was a bit skeptical about this. So he sent legates to investigate. When they got to Constantinople, the legates arrived as judges. This is what comes up in the acta of that council. Nobody appealed to Pope Nicholas. Okay, so he shows up as judge of this council, and somebody had brought up the question at the council, how can Rome come here and judge the situation? And the legate said that the Pope of Rome has the legal right to investigate affairs in every other church. The Greek representative of the council responded and said, we have no disagreement with that. And they allowed for the trial to be had. And they found out that Photius, the legates agreed with Photius, okay? So when they got back to Rome, Pope Nicholas did not receive that council. So you were talking about a different council. Okay. Mm-hmm. But there we have a situation where the Byzantine episcopate admitted that Rome had the legal right to hear appeals anywhere in the world and overturn decisions, mm-hmm. And that if people did not observe those decisions, they would be in conflict with the canons. Mm-hmm. That's all I'm arguing to show that back in the 4th century, Rome enjoyed this particular legal jurisdiction.
The argument from 861 is not what's present back then. This is what you do, is read what you find later back into. This is your whole project.
But the council at 861 referred to the 4th century.
So what?
But you just said it had nothing to do with the 4th century.
No, I'm saying that the fact that there's this council in 861 does not prove what you're trying to prove. So yes, this council can make that appeal. It can look back and it can say that. Just like at the Council of Florence, you had many of the patriarchates do the same thing.
So they're wrong to do that?
Sure.
They're wrong to appeal to the past.
Correct.
I don't think that's
they're wrong.
Correct.
They're wrong to appeal in this way because there's a pattern of nonconformity, yes, in the Eastern Church, correct.
Okay, so the Byzantine episcopate with Photius in presidency was wrong when they agreed that the 4th century canon law testifies that Rome could hear appeals and overturn decisions anywhere in the world.
Yes, there are many cases where there are errors in canon law. That's why we believe that the distinction I made earlier between canon law being on the basis of custom and divine law being de jure divine, right? There's a difference between those two things. So we don't appeal to canon law. We don't appeal to everything that Western popes have done as if that was proof of the position that you have. In other words, as a Roman Catholic, you can appeal to all kinds of statements in papal progenitors, right, in the first millennium.
Even
But
Greek
that doesn't
councils,
prove
apparently.
that doesn't prove.
I could appeal to Greek councils and still be wrong.
You can. In fact, you can. That's what this is the whole argument of the Council of Florence.
Well, the Council of Florence is one thing, but I'm appealing to a council where
it doesn't matter. It's a regional council. Canon law is not infallible.
Okay. Well, the Council of 869, which met 8 or 9 years later, said the same thing in stronger terms.
So you can dig up these things like this, and I can point to Pope Hormisdas, right? And I can point out that the Sixth Council includes him, as does the Confession of Saint Sophronius, in the list of the heretics, right? And all you're going to say is that, yeah, but that was a mistake, and later the Pope corrected that. But what it shows is that the universal mind of the Church at the Sixth Council had no problem condemning a Pope. So I have no problem admitting errors in the East, in the West. There have been countless patriarchates of Constantinople who've been heretics. The fact that I can admit that a patriarch of Constantinople in many cases can be a heretic goes perfectly with saying that he can be wrong in his local synods.
Yeah.
He can come up with canons. He can think all kinds of heretical things. That doesn't prove Eastern Orthodoxy wrong, because here we are still existing.
Okay, so let me get this straight. Church fathers can be wrong.
Yep.
Councils can be wrong.
Local synods can be wrong. Yes.
Well, even ecumenical councils can be wrong.
No. Aspects of local synods can later be received into ecumenical synods.
Well, okay. Well, the Council of 879.
It's not an ecumenical council.
Okay, so but let me ask you something. The Council of 879. This is the council that many Orthodox are wanting to bring out as the eighth ecumenical council.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
In fact, their Mark of Ephesus at Florence brought up the authority of this council.
Right.
This council is not a heretical council, at least. Okay. It may even be an ecumenical council in the near future.
Yeah, the Orthodox view holds it as authoritative. We don't have as clear a divide. Let me give you an example. So after the oikumene of the Imperium goes away, right? There are Palamine synods. For us, for most Orthodox in the world, they are received as authoritative. So the reception, there's an aspect of reception theory that's true for Orthodox. There's also an aspect of reception theory that's true for Roman Catholicism too, because Roman Catholics look back and they receive and they reject both saints historical events. They'll change their mind on certain things. And there's also an aspect to which the Pope is perceived to be true because of reception. So all of these things actually go into whether you're Orthodox or Roman Catholic. They both have an aspect of reception theory. So what I'm saying is that the Palamite synods, they eventually made it into our liturgy, for example, the condemnations of those who don't believe in uncreated grace. So for us, that's authoritative. So that, in other words, it's not as black and white as the way that it is in the Roman Catholic perspective, where you think you have a list of the document. This is the book which shows me all the infallible documents, book X, Y, Z, but Denzinger, and then I have this. It's not like that in Orthodoxy.
Okay, all right. So
on a bunch of legalities.
I understand. Thank you for going
not
through
black
that.
and white.
I understand. Yeah, and I want to respect that, because a lot of Roman Catholics have this. We could call them epistemological gluttons. They seem to want everything to be black and white.
Okay.
But so I appreciate the point. But I just want to get this straight. I could appeal to church fathers, I could appeal to councils, and I could appeal to authoritative councils that are accepted. Mm-hmm. And I can even appeal to ecumenical councils. And they could all be wrong?
You have the same view, yes.
I understand, but I can table that. But I'm asking if that's what you're doing right now.
Yeah, we have that same view. Now, an ecumenical council, in terms of what's received over time, no, it's not going to be wrong.
Okay. So
and let me show you that we both agree with that. Like, you agree with that because the Seventh Council, when it affirms the Trullan Synod, the Quinisex Council, it actually says that married priests are okay. The Pope later said that is not okay. We're not going to accept that canon of Trullo that is accepted at Nicaea as universal. That's one example where the Roman Catholic Church does the exact same thing. There's a council that does X, Y, Z. They look back and they say, well, this part, and we're not going to do this. There's other example in the history of the Roman Catholic Church. And we have no problem saying, obviously, the Council of Florence. We don't accept the Council of Florence, and most of the time, bad Roman Catholic. I'm not saying you, but bad Roman Catholic apologists said, well, look, this is pentarchy proving that you didn't accept reunion with Rome. That's not how it works.
Right. Okay. So yeah, I shoulder that. We do that as we do that as the Roman Catholic Church has done that over and over again. Okay, but I just want to get straight because my question is very specific here, because I'm trying to build a case for the papacy as a divine institution. That again, that papal infallibility is only one aspect. I haven't even gotten to that yet, or if we may not. We're probably not going to get to that today, but I could appeal to church fathers. I could appeal to Eastern Orthodox saints. I could appeal to Eastern Orthodox doctors. I could appeal to local councils. I could appeal to authoritative local councils that are not rejected.
Correct.
I could appeal to ecumenical councils to try and prove that there was this belief, quirky as you might want to see it, that the Pope of Rome has this divine investiture through Christ our Lord to Peter, and it could all be wrong still.
Yeah, of course. If
I
didn't think
my next question
because it's read into it.
Right. Oh, okay. So there's two different claims here. What I'm asking you is,
you're listing all these things that we just went through. I think you're just, where are you going?
I just want, this is more of a criterion question. Okay. If I could appeal to church fathers in the East, I could appeal to doctors in the East, councils, ecumenical councils, to show that there was this belief.
Which belief?
That there is a divine investiture in the Roman See.
No, I have not granted that. That was the very thing that I disagreed with from the beginning.
Okay, but when church fathers say that, and when councils say that, they're just wrong?
No, you've tried to do a sleight of hand here, where again, our view is that the Roman Catholic doctrine of the papacy has evolved from a position of honor and a position of appellate structure into universal jurisdiction infallibility. That's what we reject. That's what the whole issue is over. And so there are many fathers in the West. Okay,
I understand.
So now you're saying, I can appeal to fathers who talk about these things and they're all wrong.
Okay, but let me get more concrete here. The letter of Saint Agatho to the Council of Constantinople III. It's one of those famous letters that we would say as Roman Catholics is an ex cathedra. There's a couple of ex cathedra statements.
The only thing you care about is the fact that he talks about the See of Peter, and you don't even believe the essence energy distinction.
Okay, but we could talk about the essence and energy distinction, but here's the issue, okay?
No, because I can prove that you're wrong by the fact that you don't believe the letter and you just want to copy and paste
yes, and I would welcome that, Jay, but I need some space to talk about this point before we can get to that point. Can I get that?
How are you going to appeal to a document that you don't believe?
Okay, but I'm going to say it works both ways. Can I show that there's a problem here that's equally on your shoulders?
No, because it's very
easy. I can't do that. You're not going to give me the chance to do that.
Yeah, because we have that. Ultimately, that comes back down to paradigms, doesn't it?
Well, we could get to paradigms, but let me say what I'm going to say, and then we can get to epistemology. We can get to paradigms. We can get.
You're an apologist for the papacy. That's all you are.
But you might call me. You might call me that, Jay. But I have some of my best friends are Eastern Orthodox.
Okay.
I'm not out to collect converts here. Okay. I
am. I think that you're in a very dangerous church.
I understand, Jay. I understand that, but and I'm not going to try to stop you. But here we're trying to follow rules of basic debate here. I have a point that I want to make that I believe.
Yeah, I know you think that you think it proves infallibility. You think it proves jurisdiction and a special promise to Peter.
But you don't know what I'm going to say.
I've heard the Pope Saint Agatha letter argument. Don't you think I used to make it as a Roman Catholic?
Okay, you've heard other people make it.
Don't you think I used to make that argument as a Roman Catholic?
No, yes.
I did.
Yes. Yeah, and I want to respect that because I'm not coming to the table here speaking to somebody who doesn't know what I'm talking about. I know you know what I'm talking about, but I need a space to make a point. Can I get it?
I mean, I'm sitting here quiet.
Okay, good. Okay, good. So we'll see how far this goes. The letter of Saint Agatho to the Council of Constantinople III says, according to Philip Schaff, who's a Protestant historian, and one in his volumes on the church, the history of the church, he says that Pope Saint Agatho claims the doctrine of papal infallibility in that letter. Now, I know you know that. I'm not done. Okay, that's not what I'm getting at. That letter of Agatho wasn't accepted partially by the council. The statements that were made by the council when they received that letter are astounding. They call it this is the divine, the divine healer in heaven has made you the divine healer for us on earth. All this highfalutin stuff. Okay, we don't take that literally, but it accepts it in totality. So the very kernel of what became the heresy that today we call papal infallibility was there, according to a Protestant historian. In the letter of Agatho, it was received by the council as the dogmatic statement of the council.
Okay, this is
the
stupid.
emperor
Erick,
at
this
the
is
time.
ridiculous. I can cite you Protestant scholars in the Schaff set who list the condemnations of Hormisdas at that same council as proving against papal infallibility. So you're citing Schaff is utterly pointless. It means nothing.
Okay, but my point still has. I'm going to make it, and then I'm going to toss it to you so you can talk about it. Okay, that letter teaches papal infallibility. Okay, number two, the council received that letter. Now, they may not have believed papal infallibility. Okay, but they received that letter. The council gives us evidence that the letter was divinely written. Okay, maybe they were exaggerating a little bit, maybe a lot. The emperor at the time accepted that letter and made it the dogmatic statement of the council. Okay, so how can you say that this is negligible as a piece of evidence, not proving papal infallibility, but showing that one of your saints, Agatho, believed it, that one of your councils accepted it, and number three, it's been received over time. So, the Byzantines took apart Honorius's letter because it had the monothelite doctrine in it, right? Honorius said, one will in Christ, right?
Correct.
Well, why didn't they condemn Agatho when he said that the See of Rome is divinely invested with this authority to teach the whole church?
For two reasons. One, because when there was persecution going on at that time, St. Maximus needed the aid of Rome because he was being persecuted in the East by heretics. There's no doubt about that. He needed that help. And so there was an appellate structure. There was an appeal, not just to Rome, but to anywhere else that could back up St. Maximus. And of course, he was persecuted over this. What you should read is this, the Confession of St. Sophronius at length, which explains his confession about the Sixth Council. And it goes into great detail, in much more detail than the letter of Agatho. I'm not saying that we toss it aside. My point is that we would say that you could even read the words of Agatho in a way that is Orthodox. But he's Orthodox because he's Orthodox. He's not Orthodox because he's the Pope. That's the big difference between us. And that's why that council, they're not double-minded. They weren't double thinkers. That's why that council had no problem condemning a Pope. So unless you think they were just retarded double-mind idiots who, on the one hand, signed a condemnation of Pope Hormisdas and then turned around and said, oh, but Pope Agatho is absolutely infallible and this is divinely instituted from Peter. They're not that dumb. And in fact, I'll turn that right around on you. And if you look at the Schaff set in the Sixth Council, the Protestant scholars there go to great lengths to prove that they actually did condemn Pope Honorius. And the the statement, the Confession of Saint Sophronius, condemns Pope Honorius, and it is accepted at the Sixth Council.
Okay, you
And
know,
it also teaches the essence energy distinction, as Saint Maximus does, and as the Sixth Council does, and as that damn letter of Pope Saint Agatho does, which you don't accept.
Okay, so just to touch base here, Maximus didn't appeal to Agatho because Maximus had been dead for decades.
Well, but I'm saying he appealed to Rome.
Okay, Sophronius appealed to Rome, Maximus appealed to Rome, right? Now,
no, I did not say Sophronius appealed to Rome. Maximus appealed to Rome because he was being persecuted.
Sophronius did appeal to Rome.
Okay, well, are you saying in here he appealed to Rome?
No, he sent Stephen of Dyer, one of his archbishops of the patriarchate.
He sent this letter out to all of the other bishops and patriarchs, and they signed his confession.
Right, but
he also the Sixth Council accepted.
Right, but he also admitted that he did not have the jurisdiction to make a doctrinal judgment on the universal level. And that's very clear because at the Council of Lateran 649, the representatives of Sophronius, who was Stephen of Dyer, in the second session, gave ample testimony of Sophronius's understanding of the whole error of the monothelites in the East and why Rome was being called to act upon it.
Okay, but the confession of Saint Sophronius, the way that it is written and stated and sent out to the other patriarchates and bishoprics, and then it's confirmed, that is a version of reception theory. That's the exact same way that we view all of this. That's why listen, you've got it backwards. Agatho is Orthodox because he's Orthodox. He's not Orthodox because he's the Pope. It's the other way around. And that's why Pope Hormisdas was not Orthodox, and he was condemned by the council.
You're talking about Pope Honorius.
Excuse me, Honorius. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I thought you meant Honorius. Anyway, Hormisdas Honorius, close enough. But so I'm trying to get back to the point that I was making. You have
it backwards. This is not rocket science, right?
No,
the council can condemn a pope.
Yes, the Pope at the time agreed to that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Pope Leo II, that's Pope St. Leo II, he agreed to that, and he was a papal supremacist.
Yeah, but that's the point, is that those doctrines evolved.
Right, so this guy was wrong too.
That's why eventually, yes, there can be errors.
Okay, so we can have all kinds. So
the doctrines
this
evolve.
Is what it boils down to.
No, this is what it boils down to, is the casuistry, where the council can condemn a pope, the popes can agree that the pope can be condemned, and then somehow this is magically the Vatican I doctrine.
No. We haven't
yes,
gotten there. Nobody's claiming this.
You have to say that this is all Vatican I still.
No, you're saying I have to say that.
You do have to say that. That's what Roman Catholicism says.
No.
Unless you have your out of saying that the doctrines evolve.
No. I look, Jay, I want to rub elbows and shoulders with you on this because I really do get annoyed by the whole development of doctrine thing. There's a really bad way to explain it, and it's pretty silly. Okay, it makes us look real bad.
Yeah, because you're defending a guy who prays in mosques.
Okay, but again,
let's not go. Yeah, let's not go there because that's
talking about patristic history here. If we could talk.
Don't go to that. Don't go to that. Right.
So we can't talk about patristic history and what the church fathers believed, and what
because you can go around in circles on all that, and that doesn't mean that you got me. You didn't get me because that council condemns a pope, right?
Right,
and Vatican I says that no one can judge a pope. Your own popes agreed that Honorius was a heretic.
Okay, let me ask you something just on that note. Okay, have you read the Acta of the Council of Rome 869?
If that's in Denzinger, maybe.
Okay. Well, the Acta of that council was sent off to Constantinople, was read aloud at the Council of 869.
Eric, all you're trying to do is get us to admit a point that would make us accept Frank. We will never accept praying in mosques and Frank and the Vatican II apostasy. Why do you want to defend this? Is it just because of pride that you invest in this?
Jay, just picture me as somebody who's not even in communion with Pope Francis. We're just talking about history.
But that's who you are.
But I understand, but we're debating a certain topic, and I could be an atheist for all that matters.
Yeah, this is where we get into the epistemic issue, because there's no such thing as the neutrality that you're trying to come up with here.
Okay, but what I'm saying is there are certain historical events, statements, and concepts that we're talking about here.
All of this is lawyer talk.
Regardless.
endless books to try to prove something that is damaging people's souls. That's why it's so serious.
Okay, look, you have ample space to make that argument. And if you're right, you have your own venue with Jay Dyer's YouTube channel to make that argument and help all those souls. But you came onto this channel to discuss a certain debating point. And we've gone off from that, and I've allowed us to travel where you're going, and I'm going with you. You're going fast.
No, you're not going there because you don't want to go to the Vatican II issues. You don't want to go to Mortalium Animos because it clearly refutes you. But it says that pan religious ceremonies are indifferentism and apostasy, and the popes have participated in that for 60 years.
Okay, we're dealing with the Greek or the Eastern Orthodox history of the first 10 centuries, which, according to them,
I thought we were going to be able to discuss that and the Vatican II issues.
Yes, but it takes two to tango here. You're making claims about the Council of Constantinople III that I'm trying to deal with in order to show that you're wrong.
Yeah,
and you're
but
not
I'm not wrong if that council itself had it in their mind that they could condemn the Pope.
Right, but let me respond to that. Right? Can I respond to that without us going to the clown match?
Your response is just restating the view.
But you haven't even heard my response.
I'm waiting.
Okay, good. All right, so let's see how this one goes. The Council of 869 in Rome, Pope Hadrian II was rehearsing some of the history, and he was responding to Photius, who tried to excommunicate Pope Nicholas. And he said that Pope Honorius was condemned. This is the Pope talking, okay? Pope Hadrian II. The Pope was condemned because he was being accused of heresy. Before saying that, he said the rule that Rome cannot be judged stands. But here's the exception in the case of a heresy, because inferiors are not obliged to obey superiors when superiors
exactly right
are in heresy. So there was already at work, close to the history of Honorius, of people in the Eastern Orthodox Church, because Hadrian II is not a member of the Catholic Church, right? Catholic Church is a sect that was created in the second millennium. So Pope Hadrian II was a bishop in Rome, Orthodox Rome, and he already has a distinction between being free of judgment on disciplinary and moral levels, except for the situation of heresy.
Yeah. So your appeal, here's your whole argument. Your argument.
I'm not done. I'm not done.
Well, you're talking slow motion, dude. Come on.
You can have a pope who's sainted in the Orthodox Church, Pope Leo II, who claims both infallibility, that's testified by non-Catholic historians. You can have a pope who believes in supremacy and agree to the condemnation of Pope Honorius.
Again,
you can say they're inconsistent, but that was there in the history.
Eric, it doesn't matter if you can appeal to popes to prove popes, because we don't have as our epistemic authority the Pope.
But I'm not appealing to popes.
Yes, you are. I'm
appealing to Eastern Orthodox saints.
Yeah, but we don't have the same perspective that you do. We don't have a problem saying that.
Not Eastern Orthodox.
We don't have a problem saying that people's views can evolve and they can make mistakes. Many church fathers, many patriarchs, many saints, many theologians have made mistakes.
Yeah, I get you. That's a good point. That's a good point. That's why I was asking before.
That's why it took centuries for the church to see where this was going and to figure out that we're going in two different ways, two different paths. That's why this happened.
Okay.
So it wasn't an overnight thing. It wasn't like as soon as Gregory the Great says a statement about the importance of the Roman See, the whole world looks at him and says, because nobody thought that this is what would happen and this is the way that the church would go. Nobody expected a giant schism between the East and the West, right? It's unfortunately that's what happened. And our view is that it's a thing that evolved over time. And that's why you see a gradual approach to not just divine claims, but also temporal claims. And that's why you're being very dishonest here, because you know that the Roman Catholic claim is not just about authority related to Canon 6. It's also about all of these other prerogatives, the universal authority over all magistrates, over the entire world.
But you're accusing me of being dishonest, but I admit it
because you know that.
I do know that, but I've never claimed otherwise.
That's not there in this first millennium. It's a doctrine that evolved. That's what I'm saying. You know that evolves. That's why it was propped up with all these forgeries.
Okay. No.
Yes, it was. The temporal authority of the Roman bishop was absolutely propped up by all these authorities. And how absurd when we get to the Great Western Schism is it when we've got 3 guys in France claiming that the See of Peter is in France. Supposedly jurisdiction, right, is in Rome. I thought that was the suburban claim of the Italian province, right? Canon 6 of Nicaea. But because he's the Bishop of Rome, he can actually move the See of Peter to a palace in Avignon, France. That's what you have to defend. You have to defend all of that stuff. All I have to do is say, I don't want any part of that. We don't need that. We've been here for 1,000 years without the Bishop of Rome, and we still exist. And the modern papacy admits that we still exist.
But
how is the Roman office?
But how is this fair, Jay? Because I'm telling you what your own saints believe, what your own councils believed, and you're saying you can neglect all.
No, you have a Roman Catholic view of how orthodoxy should view these things, as if everybody in the history of orthodoxy, if they didn't have the exact same right perspective, or if they made an error, suddenly they're not a saint or they're not orthodox. We don't have that all or nothing view. There are all kinds. We think Augustine made errors. We think Justin Martyr made errors.
I understand that, but
there are synods that made errors. There are canons that are erroneous.
But that goes back to my other question: is I appeal to all these Orthodox saints, I appeal to these councils, I appeal to these dogmatic letters.
But it's a doctrine that evolved. You haven't demonstrated the thing that you need to demonstrate, which is that it's universal jurisdiction and infallibility. What you've done is appeal to an appellate structure and read into that these things that you're later finding popping up in centuries later, which is something that evolved. Yes, it evolved.
Okay, so I have a question for you. What can I appeal to in the first millennium that would prove to you that the Pope has universal jurisdiction?
Nothing, because there's nothing there to prove it.
No, but what theoretically would be there? In other words, if the doctrine was true.
All I need is one example to disprove it, to show that it's not true, because it has to be true from the beginning all the way through.
So let me ask you this.
I need is one example of a heretic in the office of Peter for decades, and we've had that for the last 70 years.
All right, I'm talking about
it's a 2,000-year thing. It's all of it. It's a house of cards. It's all built on one thing.
Okay, but
just about something in the 6th century.
If we're talking about the first millennium, what would be admitted as evidence of that the Pope had universal jurisdiction?
I've seen all of these arguments, and I don't see where they are.
No, but what I'm asking you is this. You saw all the arguments that Catholics have made in the past. They're not compelling.
By forgeries.
They're not compelling, right?
No.
So theoretically, what would compel you? What kind of evidence would compel you?
You don't understand paradigms, because there's not if there was a compelling piece of evidence, I would have remained Roman Catholic and I wouldn't have left Roman Catholicism.
No, I get you, Jay. You're saying that there is no evidence, but my question is, what kind? Like if we're in court and a lawyer is going off and he's saying, the evidence to the accused person is not sufficient. What you would need to prove is X, Y, Z. So what I'm asking,
I need is a consistent
evidence.
Consistent presentation for 2 millennia. That's what we need.
Okay, so for the first 10 centuries of the church, you need absolutely a perfect sign of every pope and every saint and every council.
No, didn't say that. A consistent presentation for the totality of Vatican I present for 2 millennia. That's what you need to prove.
Okay, so if we appeal, what could we appeal to then, theoretically speaking, in the first millennium, that would be a piece of evidence of that?
the evidences are going to be read according to our paradigms. You see, we come from two different paradigms. I come from the Orthodox paradigm. You come from the Roman Catholic paradigm. That's why you see these pieces of evidence from history in a very different way from what I do. And that shows that the classical foundationalist Thomist epistemology is not true, because we're both reading the same evidence from different paradigms. Now, that doesn't prove me right or you right or me wrong or you wrong. I'm just saying that that's how I think worldviews work. And that's why we have a much more circular type of epistemology, a coherence theory. And that's why ultimately I wanted to talk about epistemology, because when we have the office of the papacy, it doesn't solve anything. It doesn't help us. It doesn't do the thing that it's supposed to do. And I truly, genuinely think that it has arisen because of the Renaissance, because of the errors in divine simplicity, because of created grace and the filioque. It gave rise to the Western doctrines and the trek of the West. And Gregory Palamas predicted that. You can reject what he says, but he said the West would become atheist if it went down that route. So I think that that's a much better explanation.
Yeah, what I'm trying to get at here, because I want to get to the epistemology thing, but what I'm trying to ask you, Jay, is, you discounted all this evidence.
I didn't discount it. I said you're reading into it from a Roman Catholic paradigm. I'm not discounting those things.
I understand, but what I'm asking you is, what would qualify as a piece of evidence?
Do you understand that the way your system is structured, it's a totality view? It's not just about a specific piece of evidence that we find at this council or that council or this one. It's a whole perspective that includes all of these aspects of Vatican I and ordinary universal magisterium and ordinary magisterium and ex cathedra statements and Denzinger and history. All of these things go into what it is to be the papacy and to defend the papacy. All of that is part of it. It's a giant thing, and it's not just the first millennium. It's the whole package of 2 millennia and all of the things that have been happening past Vatican II. It's one big thing.
Talk about 2 millennia, man. It's a lot of stuff to talk about. That's why we're trying to get to what we originally were talking about and take our time.
But you have to defend Vatican I. That's
okay, but we can get to that maybe on another day. Okay, well, we're talking about a lot of things here, but we have to talk about.
I don't think these things operate. Here. They don't operate on their own outside of a theory. They don't operate on their own outside of some holistic system. That's why we have two different views. You come from a Thomistic type of classical foundationalist type of view. I think that would be the Roman Catholic view. We come from a more circular coherence type of view.
Okay, good. But you want to reach Roman Catholics. If I'm wrong, I want to be proven wrong. I want to know the truth. All I'm asking you is this: what would count as evidence of the papacy in the first millennium?
A coherent explanation of the doctrines of the papacy from the beginning all the way through to the present day.
So if we could give you five saints from each century that talk about the divine institution of the papal office,
no,
would that count?
I mean, you just ignored everything I've been saying for the last 2 hours.
But I'm asking.
I admit to you that something evolves over time and that it becomes the papal view. Then just returning it back and saying, well, but I can find 5 people that you accept that eventually accepted something like this. That doesn't prove the view.
I understand, because I'm not trying to prove the view, Jay. All I'm trying to get from you is this.
You're not trying to prove the view?
Not right now. At this moment, I'm trying to ask you a specific question. I'm trying to ask, because if we don't know what would constitute evidence, then you're not qualified to dismiss anything.
The evidences do not come pre-interpreted and neutral. Evidences are interpreted from a paradigm, from a worldview. All evidences are. Does that mean you can't use evidence? No, but it comes from a paradigm. And so that's why we have to look at presuppositions and worldviews as a whole. That's why the Roman Catholicism is not just this piece of evidence and that piece of evidence. You stack it up and there's a good case. It's a paradigm. It's the whole thing. It's a whole kit and caboodle. It's a house of cards.
All right, we'll move on to the epistemic issue. But, my conclusion on this here is that you can't even give us what would constitute evidence of the papacy in the first.
You have the burden of proof because you believe that it's an infallible universal jurisdiction, and it has to be the case from the beginning.
You can't
given any of that.
Tell us though what would constitute valid evidence. So
I just gave you 5. Do you want me to say it for the 5th time? We need to see a coherent presentation of the Vatican I view from the beginning all the way to the present day popes.
Okay, so we could probably get close to that. but that would take a long time, but that's good.
Okay, but
So
you asked me what I expect. That's what's expected because extraordinary claims demand extraordinary evidence.
Okay.
And claims of the papacy are quite extraordinary.
Do you think the claims of orthodoxy are extraordinary?
Well, if we mean extraordinary in the sense of supernatural, then yes. If you mean extraordinary in the sense of I'm supposed to accept that a guy praying in the mosque is still the representative vicar of Christ, then I'm in it in two different senses.
No, but what I'm asking you is this. Do you think that Eastern Orthodoxy has extraordinary claims that would require a consistent, coherent argument from the beginning to the end?
Yeah, I believe in coherence theory that would apply to me and you. Yeah.
Okay. So in other words, you believe that despite all these Eastern Orthodox saints teaching about the papacy, they still play a role in this.
They're not teaching the papacy. How many times do I have to say this? It's like,
no, I mean,
are you like a program, a robot? I mean, how many times do we have to say this? That the fact that we have saints in the East who saw the papacy as a thing that it could appeal to, and then over time this grew into a thing that we quit accepting, does not mean that it's true.
Yeah. Well, I mean, at this point, I'm not sure what to say. I mean, you're saying that I'm required.
I've already answered this objection like 10 times, and you just.
I understand, but I don't think it's fair because you're saying that I'm required to give this perfectly consistent, coherent argument about the papacy.
No, it's systems. There's nothing wrong.
You're not willing to admit that Eastern Orthodoxy is required to have the same thing.
Dude, are you not listening? Our whole system admits that there are errors. We don't have a problem with patriarchs.
And so does ours.
And apostate.
But so does ours.
The system is built on one guy, and it has to be correct.
No.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. Yes,
I asked you what would count as evidence. You said a consistent
paradigm.
Yeah. But then you're not willing to
listen, Eric, it's not inconsistent.
Criteria of Orthodox.
It's not inconsistent in our paradigm for saints and councils to be wrong. In your paradigm, it's wrong. It's impossible for the Pope to be wrong.
But here's what I'm saying, Jay.
Because your paradigm is built on one guy. That's why.
Okay, but that's another assertion. I don't buy into that assertion. Okay, listen.
That's what Vatican I defines the papacy as. It's
the
foundation of the church.
Jay,
your whole church is built on one guy.
Okay, Jay, you want your listeners to benefit. You want our listeners to benefit. We got to be able to dialogue here.
Yeah, but you're not listening.
You're saying that I'm required to have a perfectly consistent amount of evidence from beginning to end.
We both have the same requirements.
Okay, so are you willing to say that Orthodoxy is perfectly coherent from the first century forward?
It's the most coherent, yes.
But you got to clean off all those saints that teach.
It's not inconsistent and incoherent with our view for people to make errors. We have many saints who made errors.
You're saying that.
And you just keep appealing to this as if this refuted the view, because our view is not built on one saint. Yours is. Your whole church is built on one guy being right. Ours is not.
Okay, hold on a second here, Jay. You said that I'm required to have a perfectly coherent evidence track record.
Your objection does not mess up our position
to now.
You don't understand.
And I'm asking you, does Orthodoxy require the same criteria? You said yes.
Correct.
Okay, but then
your objection is not a violation of the criterion.
Okay, but then you say that yes, we believe we have to have a coherent track record of evidence from the beginning.
It's not incoherent in our view to have saints that made mistakes.
I'm getting to that.
It's incoherent in your view to have popes that are heretics.
Go ahead and let Eric finish, though, because he's trying to make a point here.
We got your point, Jay. We're picking up where you dropped this. This is a very good point you made. So let me summarize. I asked you what would constitute valid evidence of the papacy. You said a perfect track record from beginning to end.
I didn't say track record. I said a coherent presentation of the doctrine of Vatican I present from the beginning all the way to now.
Okay, that's an even better. That's an even better summary.
Clear.
But yeah, it's better summary than I could put it. So you said we need that in order to prove the papacy.
Correct.
And I asked you, do you need that in order to show the veracity of Orthodoxy?
Our worldview is not the same as yours epistemically. Do you
I
understand
understand,
that?
but this is yes or no. This is yes or no. You know, do
We
you
have a coherent view? Yes.
okay, good.
Coherence does not mean that all the saints are in perfect agreement. It
I
does
got
not
you,
mean that they don't
but
make
I'm agreeing with that, Jay. I'm not going against that. So let me
Okay.
talk. So you're saying you guys have that coherent, that consistent coherency all the way from beginning to end, because part of that coherency involves allowing some of these where parts
Correct.
to break off, like, saints saying this, maybe wrong here, maybe wrong there. Why can't you pay the courtesy the same to us?
What do you mean?
I asked you what would be evidence of the papacy. You said the coherent, continuous track record. Then I asked you, do you guys have this consistent, coherent presentation? You said yes. The part of your coherence involves allowing certain dross to be cleaned off.
Right.
Why can't you accord that to us, that we have some parts that need to be cleaned off?
Because of the nature of your system and how it differs from ours in its structure. And
okay, can you unpack that?
Because the system and the structure of the papacy includes and is built upon certain presuppositions and certain views that we
what in particular
that we cannot allow and that we cannot accept.
Okay, and okay, so just so we know we're on the same page here, you set the stage for you need a coherent presentation from beginning to end. You said Orthodoxy has that presentation. I brought out that there's all these issues of errors in Orthodox history. You said that's fine because that's part of our that's part of our structure.
Oh.
And then now we're at the point where we're asking you is if you can pay the courtesy to the Catholic that we also have the ability to tolerate certain weak points in our view. You're saying we don't have the tolerance.
No, because of the nature of the claims of Vatican I. That's
okay. All right. So let's go to that now. The Catholic can't tolerate certain moments of heresy and error because what?
The claims of Vatican I are so expansive, so extensive, and so strong that they don't allow for the things that you need to be the case to save the system.
Okay, and go ahead, unpack that a little bit more.
Well, I mean, Vatican I is not that long. We can go and read it, but the claims of the special charism, the claim of the ordinary universal magisterium being also part of that Petrine charism, the view that everybody needs to be in unison with the Roman pontiff to share in that jurisdiction and special privilege of the ordinary universal magisterium, the claims of the special infallible promise to only the See of Peter, all of those things that are sort of bound up in the many claims. And Vatican I is not that long. It's just a few, it's like 10 pages of stuff like listed out of what the actual statements of Vatican I are. All of those things are explicit. They're very clear. Vatican I actually makes classical foundationalist type statements about how we can verify these things from history. We can verify these things in the Bible. And I'm saying that 2 points. One, this doctrine is claimed to be true because of Matthew 16. And then at the same time, the claim is made that Matthew 16, we know that that's the Bible because of the popes in the later councils saying that that's the Bible. So that's a circular argument. That's my one problem with Vatican I starting off with, is that it's using a circular argument, which classical foundationalist epistemology does not allow for because it's built on self-evident maxims. Second is all of those statements about universality, jurisdiction, Petrine promises, and the special role of Peter. So those are the two main foundational issues with Vatican I that I would say we have to, as Orthodox, disagree with. And not only that, that it has to be demonstrated that this was the case for 2 millennia. I'm not saying that you can't have people that made errors. I understand that John the 23rd made errors, right? And Roman Catholics admit that he said an error, and then it's, there's all the various different explanations about what John the 23rd was or wasn't saying. I don't really care about that. My point is just that the nature of those claims in Vatican I are so expansive and so extensive that, number one, they don't comport with classical foundationalist epistemology, and number two, I don't think they can be sustained historically or biblically.
Okay, so let's get this on the level for the giraffes can get that, but let's get it down to the level of the dogs here. You're saying that Vatican I teaches something that can't tolerate moments of time where a pope speaks error.
No, it says that the universal ordinary magisterium and the ordinary magisterium, right, and the ex cathedra magisterium are part of the Petrine charism.
Where does it say that?
Oh, it's very clear in there. I'm glad you asked.
Because I just want to make sure that I'm understanding what you're saying here, that the ordinary magisterium and these other things that you had mentioned are part of the ex cathedra charism.
Well, let me be precise here. Universal ordinary magisterium is part of the Petrine charism. Extraordinary magisterium is part of the Petrine charism. Ordinary magisterium is to be followed with docility, but is not necessarily infallible unless it's in line with what's universal and extraordinary.
Okay, so you would admit then that there's an ordinariness to papal teaching that allows for errors.
The what is allowed for error is when he is speaking as a private theologian or ordinary magisterium. And by the way, this is section 8 of Vatican I. It says, wherefore by divine and Catholic faith, all of those things that are committed to be believed, which are contained in the word of God, is found in scripture and in tradition, which are proposed by the church as matters to be believed and divinely revealed, whether by solemn judgment in her ordinary and universal magisterium. Then it goes on to talk about extraordinary magisterium in terms of like ex cathedra pronouncement. So it's very clear that ordinary magisterium, when it's universal, is infallible and protected as part of the Petrine charism. So that would be whenever the Pope is speaking or whenever anybody in the church is speaking, supposedly in unison with what's been the universal teaching of the church, right? Which kind of begs the question. But then it goes on to talk about the ex cathedra statements that are special and not typical, right? Or an ecumenical council, right? That would be extraordinary magisterium. But the universal ordinary magisterium is also part of the infallible protection and charism of Peter, according to section 8 of Vatican I. Now, what I'm saying then is that if we have that in our mind, then what we begin to understand is that you can't go through and pick out encyclicals as if they're teaching heresy and error. Now, the Pope could be, theoretically, I would say in the Roman Catholic, be wrong in an encyclical here or there. He could write a book where he makes a mistake, and it wouldn't be necessarily a violation of the Petrine charism in the Roman Catholic view. But I think what's different here is that being a heretic or what we see after Vatican II, these are very different than being wrong theologically. These are bald-faced, continual, obstinate teachings that are completely contrary to what was prior to Vatican II. And if we don't want to talk about Vatican II and after Vatican II, we can go back and we can find these examples of people who why was Pope Honorius why was his teaching not under this ordinary universal magisterial protection?
The universal and ordinary magisterium is a very precise reference. It's not a reference to a moment in time where a pope speaks out of his ordinary capacity, unless
the office and that person in the office are guided.
Yes, that's true. That's true. Yes. Yeah. I agree with that. But I don't see what I've asked for there, which is what Vatican I not allowing for moments of failure.
Because it's not about a matter of sin, if you mean by that failure, because we're not talking about making moral mistakes or Borgia.
No, I know.
Right.
I know.
We're talking about heresy.
Yeah.
And that would be a violation of the Petrine promise, the charism of Peter, supposedly.
Right. But
see, because you were trying to make those statements about the letter of Pope St. Agatho to mean Vatican I, and it doesn't work because Pope Honorius is condemned at the Sixth Council.
Right. And like I said,
where was the Petrine charism with Honorius?
Well, Pope Honorius, that's we could have a discussion on Pope Honorius.
Is the Petrine charism with Frank right now?
We would argue yes.
Right. Yeah.
But let's go back to that Vatican I thing. So, you said in order for evidence of the papacy to exist in the first millennium, We have to have a coherent, consistent presentation of that doctrine. I asked you, does Orthodoxy have that? You said yes. Then you said, we can withstand people speaking with failing here and there.
Correct.
I asked you if you could accord that to us.
Because of the nature of the
No.
claims.
You said no, and the reason that you're appealing to is Vatican I's decree, which says that the Pope is infallible when he teaches ex cathedra.
And when he teaches in universal ordinary magisterium. That's not the ex cathedra. That's two different things.
Right, but that the Vatican Council speaking about the universal and ordinary magisterium, that itself is an infallible agency. That's not a papal ex cathedra statement.
It doesn't matter. It's both under the carries of Peter and infallibility.
Right. So, but the universal ordinary magisterium is not truncated to the Pope's teaching. That's
I'm not saying that it is. I mean, the idea of Vatican I is that they're going to be in perfect harmony.
Right.
And I'm saying that they're not.
Right. So so let's define here. What do you think is the universal and ordinary magisterium? And has there ever been an example of that?
Has there ever been an example? It's supposedly the normative universal teaching of the church, which is whenever it's in line with tradition and what the previous popes have taught. Which, by the way, begs the question, because it just assumes that you're going to know what that is. So now we don't just have ex cathedra statements of the Pope. We also have the ordinary universal magisterium, which, how do we exactly parcel this out as individual Catholics? It seems to require quite a bit of reading and research. So are we really in a better position than anybody else with the Office of the Papacy?
Okay, yeah, I mean, we can get to that. But I'm still trying to find out why I, as a Catholic, can't withstand certain doctrinal failures.
Because it's not a matter of doctrinal error or mistakes. It's about heretics and the loss of the Petrine charism. Do you think that a Pope can lose the Petrine charism? So now that's what I'm saying is this reduces to absurdity. We're having to debate the kind of stuff that Bellarmine was debating about can a Pope be a heretic or not, and all this stuff. And the nature of this system, all it requires is one example of somebody not being consistent.
Yes, I would
theologically.
I would agree with you, Jay, that it would take if a pope or an ecumenical council under a pope were ever to enact a decree, which is a heresy,
Vatican II,
in conflict with the past.
Correct, Vatican II. Vatican II contradicts Mortalium Animum.
Then you would have found a falsification point.
There we go.
So we agree. We agree on that.
Yeah, so, Vatican II contradicts Mortalium Animos.
Okay, but we're talking about theory first here. Okay.
You said all I needed was one example. There you go.
Okay, but we're talking about theory here. Because before you were saying that we can't withstand any failures.
No, I said specifically about the doctrine of Vatican I. I didn't say any failures. I said you need to prove Vatican I from the beginning, and you can't.
And what is Vatican I then that you're asking me to prove?
I just read it to you. How many times do I have to read what it says?
But I'm familiar with the history of the church, and I don't know of any popes coming out in the first millennium. And
it doesn't have to be the first millennium. You have a claim about 2 millennia. I don't care if it's about the first or the second millennium. All I have to find is one example. Mortalium Animos says that participation in pan-religious ceremonies are apostasy and indifferentism. That's all I need. That's one example. It's the most clear. That's all I need. Right. Your popes have done it for 70 years.
Right.
That's it. That's it.
Okay, but
that's all. That's my last argument. I don't even have any more arguments. So if you want to spend the next 5 years with Casustri trying to defend those actions, you go for it.
Okay, but we went from the 4th century, and we're talking about the first.
But it's because it's about a paradigm. It's not just about the 4th century.
Okay, but in the dialogue between East and West, we talk about the first millennium and what was there. Because look, if I'm going to become an Eastern Orthodox Christian, I don't want anybody in the first millennium teaching anything remotely Roman Catholic as a distinctive teaching.
No, we don't have a problem with people making errors. So
But
if
you have a problem
listen, Eric, you can read Roman Catholic presuppositions into Orthodoxy all day long, and it's not going to hurt our view. All I have to do is find one example of but because our view is not built on single guys, yours is.
So, but okay, so then the claim would be that we have violated Vatican I because a pope has taught heresy at an extraordinary level.
Absolutely.
Okay, yeah, and you and I would agree on the level of theory with that.
Yeah, and I've tried all the. I know the Vatican II arguments. I've heard them all. I know them all.
Okay.
I tried to make we've misinterpreted it. The liberals have hijacked it. I know all that stuff.
Okay, but I think we're agreeing here now. So you say that in order to prove Vatican I, we have to have a coherent presentation of it.
You said all I needed was one example in theory.
Right, and I agree with that. Okay, but that's a separate question. Did that actually teach heresy? That's a separate question. But you're conceding that we can withhold and tolerate failures as long as they don't meet the conditions of universal and ordinary or papal ex cathedra teaching.
I'm saying in your system, yeah, you would have to, but that's not all that's involved in these claims, you see.
Okay, but I just want to make sure, because I think we came to an agreement here.
Well, that's one part. Yeah. If you can demonstrate that has always been believed and is true, then absolutely, you might have an argument. But all I need is one example to prove it false. Because
I'm not saying. Yeah, I'm not saying we agree on like whether Catholicism or Orthodoxy is wrong.
I know.
But what I'm saying is we reached an agreement where, you said the only thing that's admissible as evidence for Catholicism is a coherent, consistent presentation of Vatican I. You said that the same would apply to Orthodoxy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Then when somebody says, yeah, but you've got all these saints in Orthodoxy and these councils saying this and that, then you respond and say,
because of the nature of the claims of Vatican I,
we can tolerate that. That's no big deal. That doesn't subtract or violate our coherency.
It does.
Then I asked you if you could allow the Catholic to tolerate certain failures, and then you said at first no. But then we went to Vatican I, and you clearly saw that
you're trying to equate our mistakes. You're not understanding two different paradigms. This is what you don't get. You're trying to equate the mistakes in our saints with the mistakes in your popes, and they don't equate. They're two different systems. You have a different system than us because it's not the same. You're trying to say that our view of the saints has to somehow be equated to your view of the papacy. And why can't you allow the popes made errors? Because the claims of Vatican I and the papacy, and it's not just about ordinary universal magisterium, it's also the other claims that I told you a minute ago about the special promises to Peter, the jurisdiction that was supposedly given to Peter that's universal. It's also about the temporal claims of the papacy, that just because they're not mentioned in Vatican I doesn't mean that they weren't there all throughout the Middle Ages. It's all that stuff. It's one package that you have to be this litigator, lawyer trying to defend. And I'm saying, no, you can't do that. And when you say, well, why can't you give me these benefit of the doubt? Because they disprove your system, because it's a total system. It's a totality type of claim. And saying that we have saints, admitting that we have saints that made errors does not affect the paradigm that we have. It's part of our paradigm.
But not just saints, also councils.
Correct. There are false councils, Eric.
No, but I'm talking about councils that are accepted.
There are councils that are accepted that have false canons, as you admit.
Yes, I understand that, but
our system is not built on that. Yours is. That's the paradigm that you come from.
Yeah, but I would say that we can tolerate.
I know you're going to
doctrinal failures that are not on the condition of universal, ordinary, or on the level of papal.
Okay, but Honorius is universally condemned at.
But I would say that if we did have an instance of a council teaching error.
Yeah, Vatican I versus Mortalium Animos. There's your example.
Okay. That's a separate question. So
yeah, of course it is a separate question. You asked for one example. There's an example. Oh, now it's a separate question.
Okay. So, but in the first millennium, you said we need to talk about the presentation. And I think
I've got to go, dude. I don't have time to keep going.
I mean, we can move on to the epistemology issue if you want, but I mean, if you want to move on to something else, but
Listen, I can
I
set up an epistemology debate after the Dillahunty debate. I've got to debate Matt Dillahunty and all that stuff, so we can do the epistemology question later.
I mean, but is it something you really want to do? Because it doesn't seem like you want to really debate. I mean, it seems like this is like a dead horse to you.
No, I mean, it seems like a circle to me. So,
well, I mean, I think you need to see that I want your help if you got it. If you want to show that I'm wrong,
I'm dubious of that, honestly.
Well, I don't know what else to say. I mean,
I guess for the sake of the audience, I would be glad to argue with you about the epistemology, because that's the central issue where we're going to have disagreements and approaches on these questions. And I think that it's very easy to refute classical foundationalism.
Okay. So, I just want to wrap up here then, I guess, in a summary form, that, we can appeal to Eastern Orthodox saints, we can appeal to Eastern Orthodox popes, we can appeal to councils, we could appeal to all these things that show a clear and consistent teaching that there is a divine investiture in the Roman See because of our Lord and what he gave to St. Peter. But that could all be negligible. It could all be negligible because the Orthodox paradigm can tolerate that kind of falsehood, truth, falsehood, truth, falsehood.
In other words, we're not papists. Exactly.
Right. So, but when Catholics are required to show our case, we can't even have one moral failure, one doctrinal failure.
Nope, because the nature of your claims.
On the level
why you're dishonest.
Outside those conditions of infallible modes of teaching. But I think that everybody who knows Vatican I knows that there are fallible modes and infallible modes. But then Jay said, but there has been an infallible mode where you guys have proven yourself false. So that would be another debate question.
So there is mortalium animos in the chat. That is, I would think you could argue, ordinary magisterial teaching from Pius XI in 1928. And it calls all of the Assisi type meetings, the Assisi prayer meetings, the synagogue meetings, the prayer in the mosques toward Mecca. It calls that apostasy and indifferentism. And I would say that means that those people are not Orthodox. And God has made it clear to the whole world that we should not be in communion with them. I'm not saying that means that you all have no grace. I'm not saying that at all. I think that God is patient with us. But I think that we have a duty to not be in communion with people who have promoted these things for not a year, not 2 months, but 60, 70 plus years. So that's all I want to argue.
Right. I got you. But I'm just trying to summarize here. If for me as a Roman Catholic, if I'm going to look to the first millennium to say, hey, I want to know if there's evidence for Eastern Orthodoxy in the first 10 centuries. And I find all these admissions to papal supremacy, papal infallibility, I have to say, you know what? They just, I'm just going to neglect all that because there's a lot of falsehood, there's some truth, and I just got to go with what's true.
Not our position. Yeah. Well, that's partly the position. Yeah.
Yeah. So if I'm inquiring into
you already admitted that the church fathers and saints and even councils make errors. You already admitted that. And now you're saying, but if I'm going to say that,
So what is true about them then?
Yeah. So this is where it gets to the epistemic issue, that there's no way to solve this issue apart from individuals coming to know what's true and an aspect of reception theory. This is why the Holy Spirit was given to the church. This is why Roman Catholicism doesn't understand the role of the Holy Spirit.
Well, no,
you've replaced him with the person of the Pope.
Well, look, Catholics believe in 1 John, where it says we don't need teachers, right? We believe that. We believe that there's a sense in which each individual is illumined by the Holy Spirit and does not need.
I know you admit that, right?
Okay, right. We believe that. Now, does that negate the divine function of a visible societal church that has magisterial authority? And what we find from the Bible and going forward is that's not the case, because
I've already argued this.
Right. Look, at the Council of Acts, in the Council of Acts 15, right?
Where Peter does not preside.
Right. You have all these Christians who are nous enlightened Christians, right? And they're disputing about the circumcision deal.
Yeah. Did they just ask Peter?
No, but I'm not trying to get to Peter.
But Eric, The church is governed. Our church has been governed synodally.
This is an epistemological issue. The question is, did those individuals who were disputing the circumcision debate?
It's not based on Peter. It's based on synods. We agree that
was their noose illumined by the uncreated energies?
The means that the Holy Spirit.
Okay, so why did they bring the dispute to the council?
The means that the Holy Spirit has determined to enlighten people are external, juridical types of things like synods and councils. We don't.
Okay, good.
We don't have a dialectic. We don't have a dialectic.
Right. So we agree on that, though. So you believe that.
No, but you don't actually believe that.
But hold on a second.
No,
hold on a second. I'm
trying. I know you claim that, but the claim is that you're inconsistent because
okay, I understand. But I'm trying to explain to you why maybe I am consistent, and then you could show me why I'm not consistent, and we could do that calmly and peacefully. What I'm saying is that you believe that individuals can be enlightened, their nous illumined by the divine light, and can know the truth individually. But then you said, and you admitted, that Christ established a visible church with a juridical synodal structure.
I mean, you don't have to repeat arguments that I've been making for years. So,
right, but
and now you're going to say, so why can't you say, why not have an extra level of the Pope to solve when there's a dispute?
No, I'm not getting there yet, because I know, that's not going to work with the neutral inquirer, okay? But what I'm telling you is this: you yourself already have a paradigm epistemically that admits the individual enlightenment and certainty and a visible, principled, juridical, and synodal paradigm.
Yeah.
Okay. So already you and I have a similar epistemology in the fact that we both admit that an individual can know certain truth just by the Holy Spirit in them.
Because your church does not believe in the doctrine of the nous, first of all. So the individual does not have an enlightened nous. We have a completely different view of human anthropology. Secondly, the way that Roman Catholicism says that we know what's true, again, goes back to not just the councils and not reading the Bible, but ultimately the decision of Peter. And so it's a circle. That's system.
Not what we teach.
Yes, it is. You believe that the Bible is what yes, you do. The basis for Petrine authority is Matthew 16. Matthew 16 is known on the basis of the popes deciding what the canon was, supposedly. That's the Roman Catholic argument. That's a circle.
Now, yes, if I can allow you gotta allow the Catholic to speak.
That's your position.
What I'm trying to tell you
is that your position?
What I'm trying to tell you here is that we have a paradigm where an individual can be filled with the Holy Spirit, irrespective of Peter, irrespective of the Pope, irrespective of councils, to know Jesus Christ and to know with certainty the gospel. We believe that.
That's not true. You're lying.
Really?
Because your council says the way that you know what's true is by the decision of the See of Peter, and the See of Peter is based on Matthew 16:18.
There's nowhere in the Council of the Vatican where it says
yes, it is. Yes, it absolutely does. The beginning of the council talks about knowing what's true religiously and theologically, and it says that God established the office of Peter so that the church would know with certainty what the doctrines from God are.
Okay, but what you're saying there in summary form, okay, is slightly different, because what our claim is, while we do have the possibility of reaching certainty as an individual, God has created a magisterium to cover up loose ends when things are not perfect. And you would admit that at the Council of Jerusalem, all these nous enlightened Christians who were disputing about the circumcision deal could use the help of an ecumenical council.
It wasn't an ecumenical council. It was a local synod in Jerusalem, not presided over by Peter, but presided over by James.
Right. Local synod in Jerusalem.
Yeah, that's why the Orthodox Church has always been governed synodally. For 300 years, when there wasn't Nicaea, there was local synods. And we still have local synods. That's how we're still here.
I understand, but I'm on a different sheet of music here, Jay. What I'm saying is, do you believe that the Council of Jerusalem helped the Christians?
Of course.
Now, why? All their nooses would have had perfect certainty of the issue already.
You're not listening. Are you a dialectical idiot? I just told you that we believe.
You
I just know. I
insulted
just
me.
told
Now
you.
I'm not going to continue.
no need.
Because I just told you that we believe in both.
No, you've
But you're
insulted
gonna
me.
sit
I'm
there
not
and-
going to
here.
Oh,
continue.
you
the
are an
discussion.
idiot. You're dishonest, dude.
Yeah, you insulted me. I'm not going to continue.
Well, you deserve being insulted. You're an idiot.
Jay, let me jump in here. There's really no need for any of that. Just stick to the objective issues. No need to start addressing him as an individual. That's entirely
Yeah, but
foul.
if this is about the 20th time in this discussion where I make a statement and
That's fine. Be patient with him.
states
You
it.
don't have to attack him as an individual. Still be patient with him and help
Okay.
him understand it. Just deal with the issue.
Yeah, but I don't think that I have not thought he's a good actor, an honest individual in this the whole time. So
Okay, but still,
so I
leave
am being
your
patient.
personal opinions about him to the side and deal with this issue objectively.
Well, I'm going to call him out if I don't think he's being honest.
Well, okay,
and-
but you don't have
and-
to do it by
And
calling.
listen,
him. That's
listen.
all
I'm going
saying.
to okay. I'm going to state this very clear. When we say that the Holy Spirit uses means, that's not in contrast to our doctrine of the nous. You see, there's because we don't think that it's individual and God just like enlightens your nous. It has nothing to do with what's around you. We believe in the statement that God uses created means to transfer uncreated grace. That's, for us, is how sacraments work. That's how we believe that the Eucharist is the body, blood, soul, and uncreated energy of Christ. That's the way Ephesus describes it, right? So for us, there's no tension between the uncreated and the created. They're in harmony. The uncreated interpenetrates, just like in Christology, right? In Christ, in the incarnation, the uncreated energies interpenetrate his humanity, according to the Sixth Council, according to Maximus, according to John Damascus, right? So in the same way, for us as individuals experiencing that, we do believe that the individual has the ability to come to those truths through the means that the Holy Spirit has ordained, which is the ecumenical, universal, the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. So absolutely, we fully believe in both of those things being true at once, and we don't put them in a dialectical either or tension. But that's precisely why we don't think we need the office of the Pope, because he comes up as an epistemic, juridical attempt to try to solve an epistemological problem.
Okay. Well, no, I don't know. The issue that we're dealing with here is very clearly stated by me, and I haven't heard anything to respond to what I'm saying. The Council of Jerusalem was a synod. It was a juridical synod. Jay admitted that it helped the Christians. Why would it help the
Did
Christians?
you not listen to what I just said?
Because you're admitting what I'm saying. You're admitting exactly what I'm saying. But you don't accrue that. You don't allow that for the Catholic, and for no reason. There's no.
Because you're misunderstanding that our critique is not that you don't say true things at certain times. I know that there are statements where, for example, you can find statements where condemnations and densing are said to be for the enlightenment of every individual Catholic, right? So there is the tacit acknowledgement that yes, the faithful can know the doctrines and can know the theology. I'm pointing out a contradiction between that, and that is a correct view, and the other view, which says that, like Vatican I, the way it words it in a classical foundationalist type perspective, and it says that the way that we can know truth about God is because God ordained the See of Peter. It's very clear. It's not. It makes no bones about it.
No,
and that's why we don't have the same. We don't have the same anthropology as you.
And there's not a single difference between that.
Yes, there is.
And the Orthodox, who says that we can have our own nous enlightened certainty of truth through the means of juridical.
Because we're not classical foundationalists. Do you know what that means?
You're admitting that a nous enlightened Christian can come to be enlightened through juridical synods.
Correct.
Yeah, but you don't want to admit that the same could happen with the Catholic.
Because you don't believe in the nous.
But it doesn't matter. Just certainty.
It does matter.
Just certainty.
That's the way that you know God directly. That's why it matters. That's why your church doesn't have it. You only believe in knowing God through created effects.
Okay, that's a separate discussion. What we're talking about
No,
here
it's not
is,
separate.
You're saying
every time you get nailed down on something, you say, don't bring in that other thing because it's part of the problem here.
No, it's not part of the problem,
because it is part of the problem.
The issue that I'm getting at here is the firm and certain conviction that certain thing is true. So you believe that Orthodox Christians can know the gospel and have it confirmed through juridical synods. But then you'd say that the Catholic can't because you have no reason.
I just gave you the argument about 10 times. You may say it again, because you have a different epistemology that's based on classical foundationalism, and Vatican I
But
says
that's not an argument.
It
That's
is an argument. It's a contradiction. It's two different positions is what my argument is.
No,
You have
what
two
you're telling
different
me,
claims that don't comport.
what
And
you're
the reason
telling
they don't
me,
comport is because it's two different paradigms of epistemology.
what you're
On the
telling
one hand,
me, Jay, what
Do you
you're telling me,
understand
Jay,
that classical foundationalism is not the same thing as coherence? Those are
what
two.
you're telling me, Jay, and what you're telling the audience is that these things don't work because they don't work. These two things, they just
They're
don't
two
go together
different
because
types
they
of-
don't go together.
You don't know philosophy. That's where we're at here. And
But
I'm not being a
How
jerk.
can I not know philosophy if I'm asking you why these two
Because
things
it's very,
don't
if you knew these two different paradigms in schools, you would know this. It's not that hard. We don't
Okay.
believe in classical foundationalism. It's a different. It's
No,
not-
I
let me give you an example. That's why we
understand.
don't believe in natural theology.
okay, I understand. I
No,
understand.
you don't. You don't
But
understand.
we're talking
because you're
about
just
one
restating.
particular thing here.
That's not how paradigms work. This is the problem. You don't understand paradigm thinking, and that's why we can't get anywhere in this discussion.
Yeah, I mean, I'm at an impasse. I mean,
Yeah, because you don't know what I'm talking about. You don't understand.
No,
the topic.
I used what you were talking about in order
You don't
to
know what these philosophical positions are. That's the problem here. That's why we can't get anywhere in this discussion. It's a big circle. Classical foundationalism is a type of approach to epistemology, and it's based on a kind of anthropology, and it's synonymous ultimately with Thomism. Okay. Thomism has that view of man, how man comes to know things through created effects, through analogia entis, right? That's a specific type of view that ultimately held sway, and I would say completely holds sway in the Roman Catholic view of man and how he knows things. I mean, there's different debates with different philosophers. I know that, but
look,
the general epistemology,
that's
absolutely true. That's why you don't know what you're talking about.
You have to let the debate floor work. You can't just appeal.
You don't
to the
understand
fact that I
you don't understand the
something.
topics. That's why we can't have the debate.
Okay, but the debate floor, as it stands, says this: J. Dyer admits that Orthodox Christians can know the truth and be certified in that through juridical synods. Yet you don't believe that Catholic Christians can be certain of the truth and yet be confirmed.
You're not understanding my argument. You don't want to understand the argument. That's the problem. You're not understanding the argument.
Let me ask
understand the difference between a contradiction and a paradigm.
Yes.
Right. So one of them deals with a certain kind of specific thing, right?
Yeah.
Will we agree there?
Yeah.
Do you agree that the Roman Catholic Church has a general approach to epistemology, and that it's typically a kind of an atomistic type of view? If we looked at something like the way Vatican I talks about how we know what's true.
Yes.
Right. So it'll talk about things like God instituting the papacy, right?
Yes.
Now I'm aware, and I know that there are places like you're talking about where elsewhere Roman Catholic theology does say that the individual can know things, and that the Holy Spirit.
Admit that we're inconsistent.
I am admitting that your position says those two things. Okay,
but we're inconsistent.
Correct. That's a different argument.
Well, then
because there's two different epistemologies that work there.
Right. Okay. So you'd have to argue why I'm inconsistent.
That's what I've been trying to do. That's why it's a paradigm comparison.
But you haven't said Erick is inconsistent because.
Oh my gosh, dude.
I mean, what can the listeners take away from this?
How many times can I restate it? I don't know. Anyway, listen.
Well, let's ask one of the viewers. Let's ask one of the viewers.
Talk to your.
I mean, I think
I don't want to talk to your Teutonic Knights in the chat.
All right.
If you really want to know this, I did a whole series on it. You can go watch the Traditional Philosophy Metaphysics series. I lecture all the way through John Damascus. I talk about the distinctions in this Thomistic and our epistemology. If you really want to know it, you can go watch this series.
All right.
I'm sitting here making the argument, but
I think I'll retire here because
I don't think we're going any further.
Okay.
I wish you the best, Jay. I wish you the best.
I don't know if y'all want to, but off the air, I can, see if y'all are willing to maybe do something that is timed and moderated, if that would be something that interests.
That might be better. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that would be that way. It allows just both of you to, address the issues within the time format, and you get equal time. So off the air, I think we could do that. But unless y'all had any additional comments that you wanted to address, we can go ahead and call it, and I'll just get with y'all, in the chat.
No, I thank Eric for doing it. I thank him for letting me come on. It was heated discussion. I appreciate it, even though we vehemently disagree. At least he was cool enough to let me come in and debate, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah, and you look, I've been a nice guy, Jay, and I want to stay a nice guy. So my door is always open for good, friendly discussion.
Awesome. Well, hey, look, like I said, I'll get with y'all off the air, and we'll see if we can get a date hammered out. But Jay, thanks for coming on. Eric, always a pleasure. Thanks for coming on. Everybody, please comment, like, subscribe, share this material on your Facebook and Twitter and all that good stuff. But I think that'll do it for now. We'll go ahead and call it. We're at 3 hours and 5 minutes. So yeah, Eric, unless you had any concluding remarks.
No, I mean, yeah, the only thing I'd like to say here is that, we went over the time, so I'm sorry about that.
No, you're good.
I'm sorry we didn't really go into the details of the 4th century. I had a bunch of other stuff, but
I think we got to some really good material, though.
Yeah, we did. And I'm glad Jay came on. I welcome him again. I just want him to know that there are rules to the debate, and we should keep to those. And that's all.
I think it would be good if y'all could do something timed and structured. So, like I said, I'll get with y'all, when we're done here. But again, everyone, please share this material. Thanks for watching, and God bless you all.